Going to be pretty good,
But
yeah.
something, it's probably worth it.
Yeah, and weather.
Mr. Mayor,
Good
how are
evening,
you?
everyone.
I'm good, thank you. How you doing? Good.
Are we all set for our members of the press? Are you guys all set? All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February regular monthly meeting for the Fairfield Board of Finance. Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I'm going to ask Mr. DeWitt to lead us in the pledge.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm hoping we can get through the agenda briefly this evening. I'm sure Mr. Bolito will help me out on that.
Okay,
First,
Tom, if you could leave.
First item, all right. We've got about 7 items on the agenda tonight. The first one is a returning item. It's to hear, consider, and act upon a resolution appropriating $1,162,000 for the costs of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriations. This is an annual point that comes up. It used to come up right in the midst of the budget process. We actually pulled it forward to segregate it from the budget process. This is a follow-up item. We did have some questions at our January meeting on this item. I'm hoping that we don't need to go into great detail on each of the items on this since we already heard presentations, but that we can focus on the questions that we did have last time. The second item is to hear, consider, and act upon a resolution amending and restating a resolution adopted March 26, 2012 by the RTM. This again was an item that was before us last year related to the oil tanks. I believe these are the DPW oil tanks. There was unfortunately some additional information that has come to light, and they need an additional funding in order to clean up the oil tanks. It was in our package. The third item is a discussion of flood insurance coverage. Presented by Ellen Thies, the account manager at our insurance agency. And we just wanted to get some additional information, given the issues we've had with flooding and the like. Item number 4 is to receive and consider the comprehensive annual financial report, the CAFR, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2012, by our auditors. Our audit team is here. The fifth item is to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution, which is a GASB resolution that the Board of Finance of the Town of Fairfield approves the special revenue funds and related fund balance classifications identified on 74 to 76 of the 2012 CAFR report, or Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. The next 2 items are administrative, to hear, consider, and act upon the Board of Finance clerk position, and number 7, to discuss the budget hearing schedule that the Budget Subcommittee has put together. Any questions, comments, concerns from anyone? Seeing none, I'm going to turn it over, I guess, to Mr. Mayor and Mr. Tetro, and you can bring up whomever is necessary. Item number 1, to hear, consider, and act upon a resolution appropriating $1,162,000 for the costs of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Flynn. We have with us today Ed Bowman, who I'd like to come up, who is representing the Department of Public Works to address the specific issues. And we also have with us Frank Cleary back there, who can address any issues regarding the, the authorization resolution. Page 4 of the package and page 4 of the resolution, otherwise titled Exhibit A, lists the 7 items that total the $1,162,000 that is being requested. So that's the summary, and you can address your questions.
Good evening, Mr. Bowman. Thank you for coming. You all set?
I am all set.
Just
we had
the
a
only other
listing of
thing I would just say
questions.
is that these items are the non-storm Sandy resolutions.
Right. Mr. Mayor, we had some specific follow-ups on these items. Did you happen to address those specifically? Because we did receive and hear these items previously. I just want to make sure we're...
2 items that, okay, a little more elaboration, I guess. The Board of Selectmen passed in their January meeting or their December meeting 5 of these items, numbers 1 through 5. They had requested more information on 6 and 7. They then passed in their last meeting, or second to last meeting, I'm not sure which meeting, passed items 6 and 7. So this is a little bit different. Last one you looked at was 837,000.
Yep.
And you had questions, if I remember correctly, and I am hopeful that Mr. Michelangelo passed those questions on to Mr. Bowman, regarding the fire station and the police station heating and ventilation and accounts, air conditioning items. But I don't remember the exact questions. It was like, I know on the police, I think, I don't know, Ed, do you
Yeah.
have any help here, please?
Yeah, to start with the firehouse, that's the easier one. Basically, all these improvements here are estimated. They all will be submitted to UI under its Energy Opportunity Program, which would mean, if successful, this could be reduced anywhere from 100,000 to nothing, actually. It's a combination grant and loan program. What they will do, we'll submit our proposal to them for all these services, and we will estimate the energy savings attributable to them. Their engineers will go over that with us, or with our consultant, and decide on what exactly they would give in terms of a grant and what they would then give in terms of a loan. And basically, a loan it has to be paid back within 4 years. So they would give the loan and pay it back over a 48-month period, and after the grant. And what that would mean is that the proposal says your energy bills will go down X dollars a month. You use those X dollars a month to pay back the loan. So it's a zero-interest loan to be paid out of the savings based on anywhere from 24 to 48-month payback. If it was beyond that, there would be a local share. 90% of the time, we're able to do this without a local share, and UI actually pays the contractor directly, so we never even have to appropriate any money, so it works very well. The firehouse, we've had preliminary discussions with them on this. They ran out of money last year and never got finalized, but this looks pretty good as a project which will not have a local share. We'll know a little better. Every year they change the way the proposal is outlined. They go to the state for that, and towards the end of February, there's a meeting where they're going to present the proposal, how the program will work this year. So in a month or two, we'll know exactly where that stands. So the payback should be under 5 years and probably 4 years or less. I mean, I thought that was the main question on this one, if I'm not mistaken.
Any other questions on the fire department HVAC system? I did have a question on it. In the write-up, it says that it's the original system
Yes,
from 1954.
exactly.
So there's been no upgrade to those units since 1954?
There's been some upgrades in other, but not these ones. These are still original. There was some newer equipment put in at about 10 years ago, but this is still the original equipment. So whether or not there's a payback, the boilers have to be replaced, period. Otherwise, there won't be any heat in the place. The upgrade is to add the air conditioning, do some improvements, take the window air conditioning out, add regular to that. So.
Any other questions in the firehouse one? Mr. Walsh?
What equipment is the stuff that was put in the 90s that you still talked about?
There was a burner. We switched from oil to a gas burner in the firehouse.
Is there any HVAC equipment in there that's newer than the 1950s?
Other than that, no. I mean, the window air conditioners may have been replaced on and off, but these are the original boilers from the 1954. Just like Oldfield School, they're the original ones from the 50s also that we're replacing as soon as we can. So it's old equipment.
Okay. Other than the oil burner that was, or gas that was put in early 1990s?
Yes.
Was any of the equipment in the rest of the fire department ever replaced, the baseboards, anything else like that?
Not to my knowledge, no.
They're all from the 1950s?
Yep.
Mr. Brown, please.
Thank you. Just like to confirm if I'm reading this right. In the detailed description, the boiler is basically the backup to the unit, the rooftop unit? So the new unit's going to provide air conditioning and heating, correct?
The new unit will provide air conditioning and heating to the second floor. The boiler in the basement will provide the heating to the first floor,
Okay.
because it's a perimeter system. So really, they both work in conjunction. We'll,
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions on this item?
Can you
Mr.
explain the air conditioning that exists there? Is it all window units, and how many window
Well-
units are there?
it's all window units on the first floor where all the offices are, or second floor where all the offices are, I'm sorry. On the first floor, except for a few offices, that's all the air conditioning there is. They're all, I don't know the exact count of the window units, but there's at least a dozen. They'd all be replaced with the rooftop units and with ducting.
So there's not going to be any air handlers in there, right? There's no air handlers in there right now pushing air conditioning air through the
Correct.
building?
That's correct.
Okay. Under the new system that you're proposing, is the bays where the fire engines are going to be air conditioned?
No,
You're positive?
no, they're not going to be air conditioned at all.
Okay.
Just the office space and the kitchen space and the sleeping space. And
Okay. So where the fire department engines are, trucks are, they will not be air conditioned at all?
that's correct. There'll be heat, but no air, no cooling.
Okay, just heat in the, is it currently heated now?
Yes.
Okay.
So it'll be the same kind of a system.
All set, Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, let's go on to the police station HVAC system, please.
Yeah, my recollection, Mr. Chair, on the police station was, if I remember correctly, and we put in a new system not too many years ago. So the question was, is there any look back to the people who designed, engineered, recommended the old system?
No,
the
this
the
is
current
a
new
system where we originally bid it out, say, in 2009, and we were looking at putting in 2 rooftop units. We were, somehow got ourselves convinced that we could work the whole system with 1 rooftop unit and redoing some of the internal piping and ductwork. So we only installed 1 at the time, and it just has not worked out. It just proved impossible to make that system work. It's a system, again, where there's a perimeter system and there's an interior system. The interior system of the police station provides heat only, no air conditioning. The exterior provides heat and air conditioning. We got to the point where you're actually at sometimes trying to provide heat and air conditioning at the same time. It just didn't work. So we're going back and adding the second unit to the original design. It's really no extra cost because we only put half of the bid system in. Now we're really putting the other half in, but with some improved VAV boxes. Now, the good news about it is if we had built the whole system 3 years ago, we would have wound up paying for half of it ourselves. By splitting it in half, even though it was inadvertently, we can get UI to pay for the whole system because they'll treat it as 2 separate projects. So we may get 90 or 100% of this system also paid for.
So for both of these, for the police and fire, and I'm sorry, I might have jumped the line here, I just want to understand the financing. We have to, and Mr. Mayor, correct me, we have to approve the entire amount, appropriate the entire amount. But the view is that we're not going to have to spend this entire amount because some percentage of that is going to be reimbursed by UI, either through direct grant or it's not going to be reimbursed, but we will earn it back in savings over a
That's
period of years.
I think, with the exception of the Metro Center, it's been the town's history and policy to improve the entire thing, and I think for 2 reasons. One, to make sure that there's an understanding what the tire cost is going to be in case estimated reimbursements don't come through. 2, secondly, to have a full authorization available from when we go out to bid so that the contractor bidding knows that the funding's available. He doesn't have to worry about reimbursements and other issues.
And then, Mr. Polito, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Bowman, I appreciate you bringing that UI reimbursement to light because I just didn't get that from the previous presentation, that was part of what was available. Also, I want to make sure I understand because the way it was described the last time, I got the sense that they were going to take out the existing system and put something entirely new in. What you're saying is that what's there now stays, and you're just going to piggyback on that to adequately cool the rest of the building. Is
Right.
that
The only
correct?
thing that's going to be changed is the VAV system.
Right.
To become a better VAV system. That's new.
Okay, because that changes everything for me, because, if we're keeping what's there and just improving on it and piggybacking and it's eligible for reimbursement, that's a whole different scenario than I was looking at the last time, so thank you for that.
Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Mayor, from the Finance Department's perspective, how do we keep track of all these grants and keep track of how we're doing with collecting them and whether we end up hitting the full amount that we expect to get? Do you maintain an account on Munis for that? So that at any point in time, like, we could ask you for, how are we doing on that school grant? How are we doing on a grant like this, to know where we stand at any given point in time?
I think Ms. Bosky could answer that question with a greater sense of exactitude than I
I can
can.
answer for the UI one. The UI one, it gets paid in one lump sum. When the project is completed, and the first month's bill is in, and they verify the savings are being achieved, then they pay the contractor 100% of the money. So it's paid at one time. We pay it, it's paid out, and then it's paid back.
Okay, do you keep track of that? Does the finance department keep track of that?
Well, basically, because the town hasn't put any money into it, when most of these programs, the town isn't putting any money into it. The contractor signs the contract with UI. He puts the money out, and UI repays them. It's only if we don't get the grant will we be doing it in the traditional way, where we'd pay first. And
So in this particular situation, we're never going to see the check.
right, we'll never see the bill, we'll never see the check, unless there's an overage. Let's say we only get $130,000 approved, and there's still $30,000. That $30,000 then would be treated the traditional way, yes. As if it's actually town money being expended rather than the UI's money.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, my question still stands to you in regards to these grants. That makes, I guess, some sense in regards to this regard, since no town money's going out, it's just going to the contractor.
And Ms. Bosky is going to address your question.
Okay.
The way it works currently is every department administers their own grants. The grants that go through the RTM that get approved, I go ahead and set up an account, and I set up an expense account and a revenue account, and I put the budgeted amount into the expense account so they can't overspend exactly what the grant is. As the money comes in, it goes on the revenue side. In terms of actually filing for reimbursement to the various agency who is awarding it, every department currently does their own reimbursement. They track it to know what is reimbursable and to know that what they're spending is going to be reimbursed. To let you know, there has been some discussion to centralize that within the finance department, but currently there's not any resources to do that.
So currently, if we need to know where we stand with reimbursements on school projects, we'd have to go to central administration at the Board of Education.
We know all of those school projects reside on our ledger, but the actual filing for reimbursement is done through the Board of Ed, or
Okay.
central
So
administration.
basically, finance department doesn't know whether we've received 80% of our reimbursement back yet, or 70%, or 100%. We really rely on, in this
As
case, the
we-
Board of Education.
As we receive money in, because the money does come to the town side, there is a school grant website under the state purview, and we could see where we are in terms of reimbursement, at what percentage. But in terms of the actual invoice to the state and timing of, that is more administered on this side of the fence, being central administration.
Okay, thank you.
Let's,
I think, I want to make sure I'm correct on this. For the finance office, with respect to this activity, is more reactive than proactive. Finance department sets up the accounts, the finance department pays the bills, sets up the budget, makes sure that it's not overspent. The finance department records the revenue when it comes in, but there's no centralized tracking to ensure that everything is properly and timely billed.
In previous years, we as a board had asked for and had received on a quarterly basis, or really semi-annual, an update of where we were with most, if not all, of our grants. We were particularly concerned at the time, this was after the fallout related to the Tomlinson Middle School and not getting some of our reimbursement back, as I recall, from the state, or not filing timely. Might I ask that on our next quarterly review, we have a follow-up item on there, which would be the listing of all the grants that are owed, all the reimbursements that are owed, and where do we stand on a project-by-project basis, and that'll help solve the question. And we have done that in the past, so I'm assuming that's something that can be put together. So, thank you, Mr. Walsh, for that comment, for that question.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that has ever actually been done.
It has been done.
Not to a complete detail level.
I can only know what I've seen. Whether it's complete or not, I'll leave to you guys, but it was representing it as having been complete, so if it wasn't, oops. But it has been done.
Do you have the document?
From 4 years ago, I don't know.
Oh, it's that long ago?
It was 3-4 years
Okay.
ago, yeah.
Okay.
We can definitely take a look at it, though.
Yeah.
I can definitely take a look,
Okay.
okay? Any other questions, comments, concerns on this point? All right, let's move on to the next items on this list. Yeah, Mr. Brockville,
Can I ask a question about a different item?
please? That's why we're here, sir.
Understand. These were all presented to us at, I think it was when we had our meeting at the, at Town Hall, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So I don't have any questions about, number one is where I want to talk, the installation of the generator at Old Town Hall. I'm okay on the way it was presented. Subsequently, we got an, and I apologize, if anybody here can help me with this, we got an email from someone in town about a mini grid or an emergency grid or something that's being installed in town. I could have sworn I remember that.
Microgrid.
Microgrid, thanks. And I remember the description of them, I should have printed it probably. I remember the description of the microgrid involved a backup nature to it, and it specifically said Town Hall. So I thought to myself at the time, why are we putting in a generator if we're also working on this microgrid?
We're working on 3 potential microgrid applications.
Right.
The one that included Town Hall, Independence Hall, and Sherman School did not pan out. It had to be defined as a critical nature and by the state and set up a set of criteria for critical nature. And this just didn't handle it because we already had, the Independence Hall already has its own emergency generator. And in order to fit in, you need more than emergency generation. We would have to put in some sort of generator that would produce power like we did at the police station. And when you have a facility that isn't run 24/7, it's very hard to do that. So it never met the full criteria for the
Okay,
microgrid.
that's okay.
Yeah.
So there's not a duplication here? is
No,
what
it's
you're
not,
saying.
no.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Brockville. Mr. DeWitt?
Quick question. I don't remember this roof being on there. Fairfield Woods Middle School? Is that always, I'm sorry, Fairfield Woods Library. Was that on the original list?
No, actually, I misspoke at the beginning. I said 6 and 7 were new. I should have said 5 and 7.
Yeah, okay. That makes more sense, because the bunkers I remember, so $200,000 to re-roof the library, but that's previously been on our 5-year look-ahead, let's maybe have a new library. So why would we be doing this if there's a potential to have a new Fairfield Woods library?
Well, for a number of reasons. One is, again, that's the original roof of the library. That library roof is leaking severely now. It has absorbed moisture. The type of roof it is absorbs moisture. It has absorbed moisture. It is leaking. And so it has to be replaced. It just has to be replaced. Otherwise, the library is going to be permanently damaged. Now, we don't know whether there's going to be a library expansion or not. The thought is that this part of the library is going to remain in place. The expansion wouldn't go up, it might go out, and therefore the roof needed to be replaced in any case. And with the damage, the potential damage and the damage that's being done, we need to do it now.
I want to go to Mr.
Okay.
Walsh only because I know that he actually toured this as a member of the Board of Selectmen, right?
Yeah,
Do you
I,
have something to,
I guess I have some questions because we had a presentation, I know Mike's in the room, so that presentation when I was on the Board of Selectmen was made to us, and the Board of Trustees made a presentation, and what they said was their most likely scenario or most thought about scenario was a tear down. So am I wrong in saying that if they decide to tear this down or the town decides to pay for a tear down, that we're going to lose all value of this roof,
I would say that was...
right? We're not going to be able to reuse it?
I
Okay.
think, but Public Works considered our responsibility to put this forward because it is presently a danger, it is presently causing damage.
Yeah.
And we
Oh,
don't
it's
know
it's
what's
it's
happening.
Mr. Bowman, I've gone for the tour. It's a disgrace, actually, that roof. I mean, it's been a disgrace for years, and it should have been replaced years ago. But Mr. Flato, from what we were represented when he was first selectman, purposely kept putting this off because he was thinking that there was going to be some type of expansion and some other stuff, and didn't want to do anything. Well, we seem to be in the exact same situation, and maybe Mr. Tetra, who's standing up, can give us shed new light on it, or?
Well, actually, we can show you some pictures of what's been going on there, too.
Yeah, I'd like to see those, actually. Thank you, Mr. Bowman. You can pass them with? It's, sure, I think Mr. Tetra's waiting to talk. Is it would,
Probably a lot of what he's going to tell us.
okay. Go ahead.
Having followed this at the Board of Selectmen level and listening to the presentations that were given early in January, or was it in December? I mean, Mr. Tetro, as first selectman, can tell everyone, but I can tell you, having followed it, I would be comfortable with this expenditure, and he'll probably explain why.
Thank you.
Mr. Walsh is correct. I think I'm going to say May of last year, Jim, if plus or minus a month.
Yeah.
The Board of Trustees came before the Board of Selectmen, presented an option. Basically, it was a $12 million option to demolish the library and put it back in. That raised a host of questions, one, in terms of our appetite for a $12 million expenditure, two, whether that site is the place to invest $12 million in, and whether that's the place we want the branch library over the next 50 years, and third, what is a branch library and what the function, some larger, what I'll call strategic questions along with that. But the short-term glitch is that $12 million didn't seem to have the support, not only at the Board of Selectmen, but at any other board. I think this board didn't even want us to hear the presentation, as I remember correctly, and neither did the RTM. So where we are is the roof probably should have been replaced. The estimates I get are 7 or 8 years ago. Literally in every rainstorm, there is a leak. The water comes in somewhere. We put this on the non-recurring list a year ago, just so this board would see it, and just so the RTM would see it, so it was on the radar that if we didn't go forward with a significant renovation on the library, that we would have a $200 to $250 million or $200,000 expenditure on that. Simply put, the roof needs to be fixed. It would have been good if it was done 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. It wasn't. We need to stop the leaking now, and that buys us the time to sort out what we do. To Mr. Walsh's point, if the library was demolished and knocked down, that probably would negate this expenditure. If the library was remodeled, then it would not. And this buys us the time to evaluate what the next steps and options are. The library trustees would certainly, their preference is that we would knock it down and rebuild, but that just is a very heavy expenditure right now, and that was before we discovered PCBs and before we had Storm Sandy hit and before Riverfield became a $15 million project, and before the Ludlow High School remodel was estimated at $8 to $23 million. So there's a number of things that have happened since last May.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Are there other questions on this item? We'll go to Mr. DeWitt real quick, and then we'll come back to Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I guess we're gonna hear about a tank later that's gone bad, or an underground tank project. This sounds like a $200,000 roof that's gonna turn into double that when we find, your words, the other damage that it's already occurred. So this bond that's in front of us has two potential in the $300,000 total of being reimbursed totally by UI.
Not this,
Not the roof.
No.
Oh.
The total bond, the 1.17, right? Two of the items on there are potentially reimbursable by UI. Right? So the roof turns into $400,000. Does that money roll into that particular project on that same bond?
I would defer to Mr. Mayor to look at the wording on this, but I believe it's going to be controlled by item as opposed to by the total project.
Should be.
Well, right.
Yeah, that's totally correct. That has been the request of this board for a while, and the only resolution that was not written that way was the Storm Sandy resolution, because of the uncertainty and the immediate need of those items.
Great.
So these
So
are...
that goes over $200,000.
So
It has to come
anything that
back
goes
and-
over, it has to come back to
Great.
all the bodies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh?
What's the lifespan of this roof if we pay for it?
30 years. It's a 30-year roof.
Well, it appears to me if we're going to make a decision to go forward on this roof and spend $200,000, that we're making some decision that we're not going to be taking it down for that period of time. I mean, otherwise, we're just wasting the money. I mean, I think we're about to make, I think, there's like, you have to choose which road you want to go down and choose it now, otherwise there's a potential for wasting $200,000. If we're going to go forward with this roof, I think as a town, we've got to make a decision that we want to use this building, and that we plan on using it without having to tear it down, meaning that the expansion idea, to me, in the very short term, next 5 years, is completely off the table and shouldn't even be discussed anymore.
There is no expansion proposal before you. The issue is at this point, because we are done patching this roof. We have patched as much as we can patch. We've used up the box of Band-Aids. So the cheapest alternative right now is to replace the roof. Consequently, it does last 30 years. We're not making a 30-year decision here. But you're probably right. If we look at the capital planning, and we've got a capital planning workshop coming up later this, given the, as I mentioned, the PCB issues, the school expansion issues, the variances in the estimates that we're getting as we're going through the projects, it's not likely that we're going to find a hole for $12 million to put in here. And I think there's some other strategic issues along with that. Is this the place to have that? And there isn't Site B now. It's at, what should we put in a branch library along with that, which are some of the questions that came through in the presentation. So I think there's 5 years would be a reasonable term to say that it's not likely we'll be proposing anything within that, and certainly anything we do would have to come before this board, so we would have that discussion again.
I would just like to say that if I vote for this, which I would like to, because I think that roof needs to be replaced, and I think it needed to be replaced, like you said, 7 years ago, that I will not, in the next 5 years, be able to do anything where that roof's coming back down. And I will strenuously argue against it to all bodies, if that's the case. So, to me, I'm making a decision if I'm voting for this, spending this $200,000, that it's not going to be torn down, the building's not going to be torn down. And we're starting to make decisions, and I think the Board of Trustees of the library needs to know that. It's just the way they can have some planning going forward.
Go to Catherine, and then I'll go to Ken.
Through the chair, I would agree with Mr. Walsh's concerns as we move forward with this. But having heard the presentations before, the condition of the roof and the damage that is occurring in the building, it reminds me of 10, 12 years ago when we had McKinley School. I wouldn't want to find us in a situation where the library becomes so damaged that we lose the entire building. But so if one, it sounds as though we're in a situation where we really need to repair this roof. And unfortunately, it's going to cost us $200,000. And that starts to dictate, in my opinion, what happens next, which is once we spent the $200,000, it would be lovely to have a new building, but we probably won't. Because as the First Selectman has outlined, we have Hurricane Sandy repair, we have other school buildings, we have other town buildings that need work. So I think we're pretty much sealing the fate of the future of that building. We're fixing the roof, and we're probably going to be living with that building as is for a long time, is what I would think. So I really do share your concerns, but I also think that we need to do this roof work.
I agree.
Thank you. Mr. Brockville. And then Mr. Brown, did you have yours?
Actually, I was going to say almost exactly what Ms. Albin said, so I just want to third that for what it's worth, because I think these are filmed, and I think it's important that the people who are concerned about the library and have had requests in or discussions about expansions or replacement, that we're making a large expenditure and probably doing the right thing. I don't think anybody here has expressed differences about that. But, I mean, I'd like to take it one step further. We won't here. Mr. Tetreault has made a pretty eloquent statement about why it probably won't come up before us, but he didn't say it obviously would not come up before us. I'm not saying you can do that either. So I would just third, I guess, that this is a substantial expenditure, probably necessary, but basically puts this building on a path for 5, 10, whatever years it may be, to be as is. At least in my opinion, I would strongly vote that way in the future. My question about the project, though, is I actually don't like to micromanage. I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form about a roof. But in my almost 4 years on this board, I guess, I think that the recurring theme has been roof problems, where we've done expensive jobs on roofs, everything from McKinley on down, and have had a lot of problems going forward. So could you just address a little bit about what we're doing as a town in terms of how we hire our contractors, how we monitor the jobs, how we evaluate, what they recommend to us and what materials they use and so forth, what we've learned, so that we're not going to have that, hopefully not have it going forward?
I'm not sure I can do that. I wasn't prepared, but I do know one thing. As part of an asset management plan that we're developing, roofs are a very critical part of it, so as underground tanks are. The top and the bottom seem to be one that rise to the front, so to speak. And I think the roofs make a big difference, the type of roof you have, a flat roof, a peaked roof, or the old town hall with wooden shingle roof. We did Burr Homestead, which had copper roofing. It all depends on the type of building also, where you're going to replace it with. And sometimes you're looking for a specialized art. It has to be an historical architect. It's an historic district. Or, school roofing is entirely different. And that's about as much as I can pick for it.
Yeah, the only point I mentioned is certainly McKinley was an issue. We definitely had an issue this past weekend with the Ludlow roof. That was the section of roof that would be proposed to be replaced next. So that was somewhat towards the end, if not past its lifespan. We did have one of the most poorly named projects, I guess, that came before this board and the other boards in the past year, the roof warranty project. All right, and despite the travails of getting that project passed, we went through Storm Sandy, and we went through the most recent windstorm without any issues to the roofs that were included in the roof warranty program. So that was somewhat good news in terms of what was taking place there.
Let's, thank you, Mr. Tetra. Can I go to Mr. Brown? I think you had a question, Jim?
No, just a statement. First, from what I've seen over the past 4 years, and I look at the price per square foot that you have,
Go right ahead.
it looks like a pretty reasonable price, which is somewhat surprising from what I've seen presented here in the past. So I'm just wondering, where'd you get the price per square foot from? Where'd you get the, I don't know if you got a quote or an estimate from somebody, maybe a consultant?
Yes, we did. We got a price from Tecta America on the Fairfields Library, who is a roofing contractor. And my boss says on an estimate of 1 to 10, he has a reliability factor of 9 on this roof. So, based on the quotes, and our engineering department reviewed it, took a look at it, and concurred with the price estimate. So, basically, between the two, we have a pretty good confidence in that price.
I would just say I agree that we do have to protect this structure, and just from my experience with this type of pricing and pricing the roofs where I work and such, that I just say to the board that this price looks pretty, I would agree, it's probably 9 out of 10, it looks pretty reasonable.
And if Mr. Bowman's correct, if it's not, he just threw his boss under the bus. Right?
Easy to do when he isn't here.
Good thing it's not taped, right?
Mr. Broadfield, did you have something?
I have a question pointed to my
Yeah,
colleague.
sure.
Just what you've raised is an interesting point, because we've had these discussions on the projects before us, and we defer to you. This is an area of your expertise. What's different here, and what have we paid for in the past that we're not paying for here? And
I'd have to look at it a little bit more
No, I
thoroughly.
understand.
But
Just
if
off
you
the
remember
envelope.
with Fairfield Ward roof, the original proposal, I believe, was like $40 a square foot. And we know it came in half. And even that, at $20, $25 is fairly high now. This may be a different roof that we're putting on, and that does make a difference. But to answer your question intelligently, I'd have to take a more thorough look than I have.
Good news, bad news, kind of.
But what I'm saying is, when you look at the price per square foot, it is really not too much here to question.
Mr. Walsh?
Well, it's a little similar to Mr. Brockfeld's thing. First of all, I feel better that Mr. Brown, with his experience and having seen talk and regarding roofs and your experience with them, I thought it was a little on the lower end too, which I think is great. And maybe this is a good contract to refer off to the to the Board of Education. My other question is could you tell me what the roof warranty is for a roof like this when it is installed?
We said it's a 30-year warranty.
30-year warranty?
I think one of the reasons it may be more reasonable, I think the price of demolition is fairly low on this roof, as I'm looking through it, compared to some of the larger roofs, so.
Does that mean because it's already demoed?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, in regards to this warranty, is that just on materials or is that on labor? Because I know when we went through this roof warranty projects and what we were paying for all sorts of monitoring and people coming out midterm and looking at things and resealing stuff. Let's put it this way. When I get my roof put on my house, I get a 30-year warranty too. But try to collect on that on year 27. And there's a zillion caveats on why, and the labor's definitely not included. It's just the roof shingles themselves.
Material is not labor, right?
Yeah. So I don't know when you say a 30-year warranty, are you talking
First
about?
material is not labor.
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me, but it may be longer than a year, but it's not 30 years on labor, obviously.
Okay, so we're not paying for any special warranty as part of this, and we know we're not going to
Could,
need.
but we're not. No.
Okay. So a leak could develop based on some things. It's just we're just paying for the materials themselves. We'd be getting a warranty on.
Right.
Great. Thank you.
Any others? I don't want to be redundant here, but I do want to return to the topic of the long-term viability of the building. Quick question. What does, I want to respect the library trustees board. What do they know about this proposal? Have they been consulted? Have they been told essentially, hey, this proposal goes forward? How are you going to live in that facility on a go-forward basis?
Yeah, at the library board of representatives from the board sat in on the presentation at the Board of Selectmen level, so they heard the entire discussion at that level.
Was there any commentary that came back from any of them?
No, we'd had this discussion since the past year. They were informed when it was put in last year's non-recurring proposal in terms of
Right.
what that meant. When they gave their presentation, it didn't go any further than that. We talked about getting this done. In addition to this, we have asked the Town Facilities Commission to take a look at the Fairfield Woods Branch Library and identify any other, and I'll use the technical term, Band-Aids, that might be put in place to kind of help extend the life and usefulness of that building.
When is that report due from the Town Facilities Commission on what else needs to be done to that building?
I don't have a date for that at the moment. They're kind of going through their evaluation.
Yeah, the reason I ask the question is, it's my understanding that this also serves as a backup for some of the computer equipment for the town. It's actually stored in the basement.
In the basement at the moment, correct.
Right. So, being that this structure is further away from the beach area and all that, my question regarding disaster recovery, A, it's got a bad roof, B, there's some mega sump pumps down there, C, there's no generator backup
I
there.
believe there is a generator.
I didn't think last time there was.
Last time there wasn't.
There wasn't.
I believe that generator's been put in place since then.
I don't remember that coming before us.
However, to address your other point, we are taking a look at our disaster recovery approach.
Right.
I've actually asked for the help of Selectman Kiley
Okay.
to work with because of his background and skill set, to
Right.
work with our IT director, both Don Leslie and on the school side, Nancy Nash, to put together a more complete report on that.
Good.
So I'm hoping that will be addressed within that.
Right. And that'll be referred to the Town Facilities Commission to the extent that this building is part of that disaster recovery planning?
Right now, those are two separate issues. One is looking at the disaster recovery, comprehensive disaster recovery plan from an overall town IT standpoint. The project that's immediately ongoing is the Town Facilities Commission kind of having conducted a review with DPW, with library administration on the Fairfield Woods Branch Library, with the benefit of the report they did last spring.
Yeah, I understand how it's currently being done. What I'm saying is if the Disaster Recovery Committee, or however you want to phrase it, comes back and says Fairfield Woods is integral to it, I think that might have some type of effect on what the Town Facilities Commission looks at for that building in terms of redundancy. in
Correct,
terms
and
of-
if they we can address that at that point, certainly.
That's all.
Certainly.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Bolito.
I'm sorry, but I have to ask, because you kind of glossed over it. There wasn't a generator,
Thank you.
and now there is a generator at Fairfield Woods? Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Where did the generator come from? What funds were expended to put that in?
Believe that was part of the IT budget, but we can follow up and get that exactly done. It's a smaller generator than what we're talking about for some of the other buildings, because it's
Yeah, I
keeping...
would appreciate a follow-up on that, because especially since we have a generator as part of this package, I want to make sure that if we turn that down, it doesn't kind of mysteriously appear somewhere.
Yep, it's not the same sizing as I
Okay.
understand it, so you're correct.
Thank you.
Let's go to Mr. Mayor. You had some.
Yeah, one of the comments that the First Selectman discussion on this, which is a little bit different what Ms. Albin and Mr. Brackfeld said, voting for this roof does not mean that the building maintains its current status totally. Mr. Michelangelo was very clear that there could still be significant renovation internally.
Right.
The roof would not impair or impede that, and the money would not be wasted.
Thank you for the clarification.
Just to follow up on the chairman and the vice chairman's questions, in regards to this generator, do you believe that this generator was solely for those two pumps that continually, because that building's underwater, always, because the groundwater's so high?
The water
So
table is higher
The
there.
water table's higher, so it's about 4 feet up, so it constantly is going through a pumping system. Are those for the pumps?
Simply put it, I'd get Mr. Leslie here to address that point, so we get one answer that's accurate for both the generators, where the funding came from, and exactly how much of the system they cover.
Yeah. Okay, but that could be a follow-up item, and exactly what the generators serve, because I presume it's not the entire building, it's probably...
It's my understanding
pumps.
it's not. It's a smaller generator. It's not the, as we learned with the Ludlow shelter over this most recent storm, because a school has a generator doesn't mean that all circuits are on that generator.
During Superstorm Sandy, did that building lose power, and did we experience any water intrusion into the basement based on those two pumps that you and I saw during a tour?
Yep. I believe it did lose power because 98% of the town was out, so I think at some point it did. Whether there's any water issue or any significant water issue, perhaps, is more correct on the inside. I don't know, but I can get that answer.
Okay, because only the the big storm that was a year before that, the pumps failed. There was no generators.
No generator,
Water
so-
started coming up, and the fire department had to come in there with generators and pumps. And we were told during our tour that that was going to be the way they were going to handle it. That the fire department would know to go over there, put a generator there, run lines of about 100 feet, and so the pumps would work. So if we could just get some information on
Yeah,
what the situation is, that would be great.
I think it would be simpler to get Mr. Leslie here so we get one answer and it's consistent with whatever happened.
Thank you, Mr. Tetro. Any other questions on this item? All right, let's go to the one new item on here, or rather the other new item on here, which is the tennis courts and the lighting. So I think, Mr. Lombardo, is that under your area?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Bowman's is here because as part of the lighting, we are also applying for a UI Energy grant, and we're hoping that that will pay a portion or maybe all, but we believe only a portion of it may be acceptable. The reason we're going for lighting, the lights were put in 1989 for the 5 tennis courts down at Old Dam Road. And over the past few years, we've been having issues with the lighting, but, and we have an awful lot of glare of the light spillage off the courts. And one area in particular is up on Sasko Hill. About 7 years ago, maybe even a little longer, a neighbor called me and saying how the floodlights are, hitting his house. And I had found that hard to believe, but I did go up in his home with the consultant from the lighting company, and he was correct. There is a lot of spillage, and one reason is because our poles are 40 feet high, and in order to get from one corner to the other, you have to direct them, but still the lighting shouldn't be spillage that far. The new lighting that we're looking at is more energy efficient, 50% less spillage, and we're anticipating a savings of approximately $2,500 a month in our electrical bill throughout the 6 months that we, 4 months that we use them.
How many months? 4 months?
Yeah, May, June, July, August, and, yeah, 4 months, part of September, 4.5 months. The reason I brought it forward now is, as you know, we're putting in the Fairfield Indoor Tennis with the expansion down there. They're going to be putting in a 6th tennis court. And I felt since they're going to be tearing up the area, it'd be appropriate to add the two new poles and light fixtures for that particular court. And at the same time, if it, that we replace the 48 fixtures, 40 fixtures with 28 fixtures for the rest of the facility. So we're going to be using less fixtures, getting more light, and being more energy efficient. With the 6th court, we hope to bring in more revenue because I anticipate using one court. Right now, our clientele and our customers are used to 5 courts. So what I anticipate on doing is making the 6th court like a teaching court and collecting more revenue from that aspect that will bring in more revenue to the general fund. I'll try to entertain any questions that you have.
We go to Mr. Bolito first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lombardo, just a ballpark estimate, how much revenue do you generate by having nighttime tennis during the summer annually?
I don't have it broken down by day, night. Our revenues are approximately about $35,000. And our expenses, we've been, I think it's close to about 30, excuse me, our revenue has been about $31,000, I believe it was, and our expenses are about $34,000.
How much of those expenses are related to the cost of keeping the lights on at night? Is that a breakdown that you have, or not?
No, I don't have that breakdown, but the big expense is maintaining the courts, the $8,000 to $10,000, early spring, setting them up, getting prepared for summer use.
So,
And, excuse me, and then, obviously, the employees.
so if for some reason this were not to pass and you were either forced to use the existing lights or, you know, not have any lights at all, you really don't know exactly how much revenue you would lose from that.
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Go to Mr. Brockfeld and then Mrs. Albin.
You may not have it with you here. We have 5 courts. First of all, just a backup question for the board and myself. We have the indoor tennis is like is that a concession of some sort?
Yes.
Right, okay. So are they bearing the expense of this work that's being done to?
Yes.
Okay.
Not,
But-
not the lights.
I understand. And during the summertime, when the bubble's not up, it's our thing? Is that-
Yes.
Okay. So I guess it's not really the right time for this, but I'm just curious, why do we have it broken down? Why do we have a concession running it in the wintertime and then the town's doing it other times? Why don't we just have somebody running the tennis court and rent, paying us for the whatever deal you have with them? It's not really the time for this, but it came to me.
Well, it's a good question. We have been looking at it, and I am reviewing that as we move along. And I've already started the process in a sense that we've changed. I've already changed the way I'm going to be managing the facility, but I haven't leased it out as of yet.
Would you say that if we were to consider leasing it out for the open-air months, or whatever you want to call it, that the expense, just like the people who do it for the winter is paying for the bubble and all that kind of work, that the people who would consider leasing it for the warm weather would be responsible or might be responsible for the lighting expense? And if yes, why wouldn't we wait until we decide whether or not we're going to lease out the courts during that time before we approve the town spending $125,000, of which we might get some back, I understand.
Right.
I mean, it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse, or the horse before the wagon, or whatever the...
It's a very good question. I don't have the answer because I don't know when or if we would be leasing it out, and I don't know what their payback would be on that, but it's
Another-
something we could entertain if it doesn't get passed.
And another question I have for you is, so you say we have 5 courts. are all those 5 courts basically booked up and full 7 nights a week?
At nighttime,
the
I would say
nighttime?
yes. Our open time a lot is in the afternoon, and that's when I put our town tennis team down there. A lot of people don't play in the heat of the afternoon. Mornings are booked, and then, like I say, in the evenings, we have some programs Friday nights and other nights. But yes, I would say the, you know,
So
5
you-
courts
you-
are
so-
used.
So you'd have some empirical evidence that would tell us that it would pay off lighting that 6th court? That's the question I'm getting at. In other words, if we weren't full up on the 5 courts we have in the evenings, then maybe we wouldn't need to light the 6th court, even if we want to have a 6th court.
Yeah. I don't know if I have the exact detailed information that you're looking for.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I'm going to go to Mrs. Albin.
A couple of questions, Mr. Lombardo. Where will you be applying for the grant from?
It would be part of, Mr. Bowman goes through the UI.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's the same project as we discussed.
And it's not possible to apply for the grant, determine whether or not you get it before we ventured into this work?
We've already started discussions with UI on it, but in any case, it wouldn't pay for the whole thing, it would only pay for part of it. This is more of a minor program. It's clear that it's not going to pay for the whole thing. They don't consider this type of project in the category of the other projects.
All right,
So
but there's not a guarantee that we'll get this grant?
no guarantee.
Okay, thank you. I guess my other thought is, as I sit here, I'm trying to look at this expenditure and do a cost-benefit analysis with the information that we've just gotten, and I think a presentation that would break this all out would be more helpful. I've written in my notes, we have a lighting system dating back to 1989. We have an issue with spillage. Is there any way to address that without replacing these lights?
No, we've done it. But I may step back. We bring in approximately, like I said, $35,000 income from the summer. Also, over the years, we've brought in, with our winter lease, $160,000. So over the years, we've been bringing in close to $200,000, $195,000 the last several years in revenue.
What's the winter thing?
The winter was, this past year was $165,000.
That's the bubble.
That's the bubble.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the lease for the property, and if we didn't have the bubble, we wouldn't be using the courts. So over the years, we have been putting, generating funds by leasing the facility out with no expense during the winter months.
Mr. Chairman, I guess that leads to my point. Given the year that we know we are going to be in when we're working with our entire budget for the town, I guess my concern is that it would be very helpful for me, rather than looking at notes that I've just jotted down now, to have a better cost analysis on this. If I understood that the tennis courts, winter and summer, were bringing in more revenue than I might see here tonight, that there's the potential of there's the reality of saving upwards to $10,000+ a year, and I can look at how many years I have to save that $10,000 to pay for the $125,000 in lights and all the benefits. I think I could make a better decision on it.
Thank you, Mrs. Albin. Mr. Stone, and then I'll come to Mr. Walsh.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I'd recommend we take this out of this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stone. Let's go to Mr. Walsh.
Jerry, just a couple of things about what you were saying earlier. There's about $2,500 savings of efficiency, so over 4 years, that'd be about $10,000, correct? For the new efficiency we'd get. Approximately what, Ed, based on your experience with UI and these type of projects, approximately what we, if we were accepted in, what would be the percentage reimbursement? Is this like a 10% reimbursement, or is it higher than that?
We've usually been getting anywhere, between the loan and the grant, anywhere from 70 to 100% reimbursement.
But you said this is a different tier, right?
Yeah, so this could be a lower grant and a higher loan. Could still come up to like 90% or 80%, but the grant might be smaller, the loan might be larger.
Okay.
But the municipal share would be,
Well, remember, the loan is still money out the door to us.
yeah,
Right.
It's just what, no interest?
right.
Right.
A no interest loan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
And-
low-interest loan.
With zero interest. yeah.
Jerry, you
That's
document,
low.
and you documented during your presentation that we're currently bringing in about $190,000,
Correct.
both winter and summer use. So it's close, let's just say it's close enough to $200,000. So that's approximately $40,000 a quart, correct?
Yes.
Do you think you'll be able to maintain that with the 6 quarts? So we'd be making approximately almost $40,000 a year in extra revenue from,
No, our revenue will drop to 65,000 once the new building goes, because of the contract went in, and they're paying for the investment of the new facility down there. So as you recall, I think it's like 60 or 65,000 the first year, and it goes up approximately 3% a year until about the 15th year. And at the 15th year, it jumps back up to about 115 or 125,000, and then back up to the,
and those numbers that it's going to are based on the fact that we have 6 quarts?
it's based on the fact that they're investing
In 6 quarts?
in the building and the court.
So it includes this, the
Right.
number that you've negotiated that they have to pay us includes the
Right.
6 quarts. So we
Correct.
can't make the argument that adding the 6 quart is going to make more revenue for us, because that contract's already set, correct?
The contract's already set.
Already
correct,
set with the
yes.
6 quarts?
Yes.
Okay, so we're basically looking at an efficiency of about $10,000 and whether we get any grant money.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Here's where I am on this one. I'm not supporting spending $125,000 on this, and here's why. I would like to see us be a little bit more strategic as opposed to tactical in this. I would like to some of the things Mr. Brockfeld was saying and Mrs. Albin were saying. I'd like to understand the business plan. I'd like to understand the economics. I'd like to understand what we're trying to accomplish. Not just from where we are today and, hey, we'll get $2,500 in savings and, hey, it brings in 35 grand a year, but where are we trying to go? Mr. Lombardo, a little bit to what you said about, we're looking at, can we outsource this during the summer months? How does it play with what happens in the winter months, right? What do we get? We have an asset there that is that tennis facility, both inside and during the summer months outside. I haven't heard the business case for how we maximize that asset. Now, I'm not implying that we jack up the fees and all that kind of stuff, but I am implying that the way we invest in and manage that asset now could have serious repercussions, either positively or negatively, by how much we can make from that asset, even if it's just to support it, and be able to invest more in it later on. And I think we need to start thinking that way, particularly in dealing with non-emergency services and things like that. We need to be thinking more strategic about how can we maximize the potential of the assets as we move forward. And that's why I can't support it, because I haven't heard anything that tells me that there's, and don't misunderstand me,
I
that's
fully
not a
understand.
criticism, but I haven't heard a fully baked business plan here that says I can get behind spending $125,000 on this asset because I know that we're going to increase this, we're going to provide a better service, and the taxpayer's going to be made whole in this length of time. I haven't heard it. That's it. Mr. Stone,
Can I make a motion that we remove this item?
do you have a second? Second, Mr. Bolito. Any comments on that motion? Mr. Walsh?
In the proposal that's in our package, you talk about there being an alternative plan.
Well, it was just, the alternative plan was to just light the new court at a, I believe it was $60,000.
And if this court's not lit, we're going to be at a competitive disadvantage for this court? I mean, it sounds like we got to either light it or make it a decision. We're not
Well, in
gonna
order
do.
to use it in evening hours, okay, it should be lit. Being that it's going
You
to,
give a lower price for the court that's not lit.
Yeah.
huh?
Discounted price for the one.
Ball that glows in the dark.
Blow in the
Maybe
dark
I'll-
balls?
But my concern was because of the location, it's the first court you're going to walk on. I don't know how much spillage we're going to have onto that court. We'll have to look at other alternatives to make it bright to walk through, et cetera, to get to the second court, which will be lit.
And also, I presume that you won't be able to play there, right? Because
You won't be able to play there.
It becomes a liability issue if someone's
my
playing
know-
on a
I mean-
half-lit court and
Right.
all of a sudden they get hurt and we're allowing them to play on the court. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I think it's just something we got to consider
Okay.
doing or, figuring this out, because either we're going to make a decision that sixth court's not going to be lit as part of this, because if we go to 0 and pull the money, we're basically telling them, don't light the court. How does that affect our contract with?
It doesn't affect the contract with the,
This is only
this
during
is
the-
only during
the
the
summer
summer.
months. Okay. The winter
No.
months, they light it with their bubble.
Yes,
Okay.
because they all have, these lights aren't for outdoor and indoor
Yeah.
use.
Mr. Walsh,
Roxanne.
I think it's a reasonable point. I think we can, I don't know if we have a motion to remove or table in this
We have-
case, but, or what the difference
Remove.
between the two is, remove, but I'm sure it can come back, obviously, before us.
Absolutely.
Nothing stops them from coming back with a newer or changed proposal, or addressing some of the things Mr. Flynn said. I can't see there being a problem as to what you're referring to, really. I mean, there's going to be spillage from the other lights, and plus, it wouldn't be that hard to string up some lights or to buy a lamp, or whatever it is that people could walk from across one tennis court to the other.
I'm not talking about safety issues for that. I'm talking about, like, literally, we're going to have to cordon it off, because there's going to be some people who are waiting who are going to try to warm up. I mean, it's just going to happen. I mean, you're going to have to, like, fence it off. And you're going to have somebody monitoring that, because if it's half lit and someone trips
I
on
hear you,
something,
but
we're going to have an
I
issue.
think our professional staff there can come up with a solution to the issue. In my opinion, I'm not speaking for the rec department, but.
Anybody else? Mr. Bolito?
Not on this specifically, but I was going to make a motion to take this out as well as take out the Old Town Hall generator, so mechanically, I'm not sure how we go about doing that.
Let's do that one separately.
Okay,
if
sure.
you don't
Thank
mind.
you.
Thank you. Any other comments on taking this item out?
My decision on it, I guess, is based on, and I don't know, Ed, whether you can give any certainty or how we'd ever find this out. What is I mean, to me, it's all depends on likelihood. I mean, if we're going to get 70% back, and we were reasonably confident, that changes my decision on it. But you're telling me there's no way to find that out in advance?
No. I mean, we began negotiation with, because it's not a simple replacement of lights, it becomes a negotiation with them, try and prove that we can attain the savings that are designed into it. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 months for UI to come around. We've had 6 months sometimes before actually. We've never lost, but you may get a lesser percentage, but it's a negotiation.
So this is something that could come back to us at a later point in time, where you can prove these numbers possibly? Because I think if you could prove to, at least to me as a member, that you were going to get 70% back and take the difference of $36,000 or so and prove that the energy savings was going to be gained over a 10-year period of time and that the lights lasted at least that point in time, it's a lot easier decision to make. But since we're sitting here
Certainly could do
saying
that.
that, well, we might not get it, then it seems like a lot more expensive thing, so.
Yeah, and I I want to see the business plan on this. I want to see the strategic plan on this. It just doesn't have my support without that. I want to know how we're managing this asset and how we're maximizing our,
Well, maybe we come back with a combination of UI's report and the business plan.
Right.
It'd be time to come back in.
I think that'd be great. I think that'd be great. Does anybody else have any other comments? Mrs. Albin?
Just very quickly, I'd be very happy to consider it with that information, but without that, I'm not comfortable.
Right. Thank you, Mrs. Albin. Anybody else? Do we have any comments from members of the public on this item? All right, seeing none, the item to take this out of this bonding package, which will change the bonding package per reduction of this item to $1,037,000 is now before us. All in favor of this amendment to take it out? Those opposed, abstentions, that amendment carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lombardo, thank you very much. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item as amended? Mr. Bolito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I would like to make a motion to amend this further by taking out the Old Town Hall emergency generator for $105,000.
Thank you, Mr. Bolito. Does that have a second? Seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Any questions, comments, or from board members on that item? Mrs. Albin?
This is an item that I wouldn't be comfortable removing. It's not a luxury, and I do think given the circumstances of our storm patterns in the last several years, I think it's important that that building have power when there is no UI power, which we have seen happen in these storms. We have a great deal of town information in that building, and we need to be able to access it sometimes during these storms. And just in the past storm with Superstorm Sandy, there were parts of the beach area where that building is that were without power for well over a week, rendering that building useless and the people in it unable to service the needs of the town without power in the building. It's, I don't consider it a luxury.
Thank you, Mrs. Albin. Mr. Stone, you had your hand up. Do you have?
Yeah, just to echo what Ms. Albin said, everyone I know is putting in generators in their house after these past couple of storms. That's our town hall. It has important information in it, and I think this is out of all these things, I think this is one of the most necessary expenditures here. So I would be against taking that out.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Anyone else? Mr. Brockfeld, and then I'm going to go to Mr. DeWitt.
Actually, because
No, go
you
ahead.
calling me,
Yeah.
because obviously, I'm always happy to hear somebody want to remove $105,000. But this doesn't seem like completely frivolous. So I'm actually asking my colleague if he could just explain his reasoning on the proposal.
Absolutely. First of all, obviously, we're looking to find some savings here, and it's a matter of prioritizing what's necessary, what's not. I hear what Mrs. Albin and Mr. Stone are saying, that's valid points, and frankly, you know, in my business, I use that town hall all the time. However, that town hall was about that close to being underwater with Superstorm Sandy, and a generator would not have saved it. So there needs to be a more comprehensive disaster plan that if the building is unusable, that we have the other options. You know, the town clerk was able to relocate to Independence Hall. There has to be some legitimate backup plan, emergency plan for the registrar as well, and for the tax office. I don't want to see us relying upon a generator keeping the building going in lieu of having a more comprehensive disaster plan for the facilities that are there. And like I said, because of the fact that the water encroached so close the last time, I just don't know that a generator is going to save it the next time. So it's for those reasons that, you know, it's a tough call, and I think there's certainly legitimate reasons for keeping it, but I think in the interest of trying to save some money and the other things that I mentioned, that's why I would take it out.
Thank you, Mr. Bolito. Can I allow Mr. Tetra, and then we'll come back to Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, we brought it back this year. I mean, for the same rationale, I believe it was removed from the non-recurring last year. Superstorm Sandy did happen. It happened right at the quarterly tax payment, and we had a major issue not being able to service our residents that wanted to come and pay their taxes, and we couldn't because the power didn't come on. It's not just the flooding, it's the power. All right? If we don't have the power, we couldn't collect. So we have people, and just for the record, power outage is not a reason not to charge somebody a late fee. We don't have that exception from the state. So if you don't pay your taxes on time, it doesn't matter that it's our fault. Your taxes aren't recorded, you get hit with late fees. We had people lining up to do that. We have power out in the building. We're telling non-essential employees to stay home because we can't have them come in and not have anything to do. So that's one issue. Second, it also happened election time. The right to vote is one of the most important rights we have. Having our registrar of voters open and our town clerk open through that election time was a major issue. We had major work to get done in prep for that. Not only the polling places, which got all the press, if you will, in terms of getting them open, but the registrar of voters, both getting the prep done for that, and in this case, when they're trying to work out Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C in case the polling places aren't open, it really highlighted a need for this, for those two important functions, and that's why we asked that it be put back in this year.
Just in response, I appreciate what you're saying. I don't disagree. However, what you said just kind of bolsters my argument that there needs to be a comprehensive disaster plan in place. What would happen, forget about the power, if there was a flood and the building was unusable? What I don't want to see happen is us becoming overly comfortable or reliant upon the fact that, oh, we got a generator there, so we're cool. You know, if the building's flooded, regardless of whether you have power or not, you're not going to be able to use it. You're going to have the same problems there because of the fact that it is so close to the beach. So what I think really needs to be done is, you know, generator might be a part of it, and I'm certainly willing to listen to that, but there has to be a second piece, which is, what do we do if we can't use those buildings? And being where they are physically located, I think that's something that needs to be considered. There needs to be a plan that the registrar has. What are we going to do if we can't access that building because it's flooded and it's an election? What are we going to do for the tax office and we can't access that building and there's a flood? And how do we process payments? Is there some backup plan, some other facility we can use? The town clerk, I remember, set up a temporary shop in Independence Hall.
That building with the other generator.
Right. But that's also higher up, quite frankly.
Actually, it's closer to the water.
It is higher up, though, is it not?
The water came right up to the back door of that. It was a long way from getting
In
to
any
Old Town
event,
Hall.
you still need to have some sort of a way to deal with the fact that those buildings are in a flood zone. And it's got to be a piece of the puzzle. And I just don't want to see us putting the money toward a generator and then saying, all right, well, that's all we need to do. Understand?
Mr. DeWitt, and then I'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had this debate last year, and I think it was probably the exact same debate. We need a comprehensive recovery plan, emergency plan. We said it last year. Sandy just seems to be this big overarching excuse for a lot of things, frankly. It's about risk management, right? If we think we're going to have Sandy, a storm like Sandy, every year, then we put generators in every building. But remember, last year, we had also gone through something not quite as drastic, right? But we did have a large power outage for quite a long period of time. And this board said, that's not in our plan. We don't have a disaster recovery plan. We didn't vote for the generator. That's the same reason that I believe we should remove it this year. I struggle with the fact that the IT department ponied up some money to put a generator at Fairfield Woods Library. I struggle with the fact that Independence Hall has a generator. And if we have services like the ones you named that are so critical, why don't we move them to Independence Hall? Is the building department critical if the power was out?
In Storm Sandy, it was absolutely critical.
To be in that office.
To be up
in that office. To be out in trucks driving around cutting down trees, I'm with you. To not be in that office.
Okay, the building department worked overtime throughout the whole storm. We brought in extra people and extra crews to do that. There were 1,000 homes that they had to check and get. Chris, I don't know how else to tell it. When you live through that.
I'm saying we don't have to be in that building.
That's where the records for the building department are. That's where they operated out of. Absolutely correct.
I don't know how the decision was made to put a generator at Independence Hall and not Town Hall, but again, it's until we have a real plan. Every discussion tonight has been about planning. It's really funny theme. We don't have a plan for Fairfield Woods Library. We don't have a plan for this. We don't have a disaster recovery plan. So until we have that thing, I'm with Mr. Bolito. This should come out of this bonding resolution.
Mr. Tetro.
Mr. Chair, if I might, that with all due respect, that the number of power outages is much higher than the number of floods. The number of floods like Sandy is much lower than the number of power outages that put the building out, both in terms of lost work and productivity time, both in terms of, in this case, protecting people's right to vote. as well as protecting the right for people to pay their taxes on time and not creating a revenue problem, as well as not taxing our residents for being late payments when it's really our issue. Having a comprehensive disaster recovery program, I'm not disagreeing with the need for that one bit, and when I sat on this board, I was one of the folks that argued in favor of having that, and we're taking steps in that direction. But unless you believe that a comprehensive disaster recovery program won't include a generator to back up this building, then this is an expenditure that we need to make at this time to protect us. Again, we did have an issue with Irene. We should have learned from that. We did have an issue with Sandy, and it came at tax time, and it came at an election time. That's about as realistic an example as you can get.
Mr. Stone?
Mr. DeWitt, I agree with you. We do need a comprehensive plan. We really do. But to your other point, to say move the building department somewhere else, just think of the cost of that. You know, we're talking $105,000 for a generator to protect the historic building, to protect records that are in there, to keep it open. I mean, this is a town, almost a city. And you have to, there's certain things you just have to do. And I can't see taking this out of here. I think it's, penny wise and pound foolish, or whatever they say. I just think we should, with everyone putting generators in their own house to protect themselves, and you have it in other buildings, our old town hall deserves to be protected. And it also, I would assume that this generator would probably be connected to the fire alarms and all that. So it's not just for floods.
Thank you. Mr. Tetreault?
Just to point out that one of the things we realized at the shelter at Ludlow, with where we had the generator, and I referenced earlier that you have to make sure that the generator is hooked up to the right subsystems, is that as the week got colder, it was pointed out to us that the generator at Ludlow wasn't hooked up to the heating system. When you look at Old Town Hall, realize that it doesn't have to be a flood, it doesn't have to be a hurricane, could be a snowstorm that knocks out power, and we have people not coming to work. So it doesn't take very long for hours to add up and lost productivity in the winter, because we couldn't operate that building if there was no heat in the building.
Mr. DeWitt, you had something you wanted to say on this?
Just to respond to Mr. Stone, we just threw out a $145,000 lighting, $125,000 lighting project because we didn't have a plan. But we're going to go ahead with this 105 without a plan. Again, very thematic tonight. No plans, no cash, at least for Mr. Lombardo, anyway.
I agree with you. Can I?
Sorry, Chair.
Well,
Mr. Flynn?
yeah, you can, Mr. Stone.
I agree with what you're saying. We do need plans, but we're talking tennis, which is recreation and not critical, and this, which I think is critical. So I think any plan that we do is going to encompass a generator. I can almost guarantee it. So why don't we just put it in now? But we should have a disaster plan, period.
Can I, before I recognize others, can I ask a couple of questions myself? We've gone out and we've hired the person to help you with FEMA, correct? The FEMA reimbursement process. We have our insurance representatives somewhere here tonight. I hope she's not being paid by the hour. And my thought is this. I would agree that we needed fully comprehensive disaster recovery plan. I would also think that it would be an expenditure to make that happen. And what I'm asking is, what is the current plan to make a plan happen? How would it be funded? Are there funds available through working with FEMA to do that? And can we move forward to make sure that we have a comprehensive strategy to address the types of issues that everyone's talking about here tonight? And I do have to echo Mr. Stone's comments on there's a difference between a plan for tennis, no offense, Mr. Lombardo, versus a plan for critical needs in the office buildings of the town to keep that. There's just, they're not comparable in my point of view. So would you like to address where we stand with the plan? Can FEMA help out? Can our insurance get us a break on insurance coverage by putting together a comprehensive plan? How does that work?
All good questions, and I'm not sure I have the answers to all of those. I think that we're starting with the plan. I've asked Mr. Leslie to coordinate with Ms. Nash and Mr. Kiley to...
But that's just the computer aspects of it. How about the rest of it?
Well, I guess I'm looking at it from a standpoint of disaster recovery in terms of how do we, first of all, it's identifying the critical functions within the town, much like you
Right.
would in any business. Certain operations you can let down, and if it takes 2 or 3 days for them to come back or a week for them to come back, you can tolerate that. You can come up with some background. Certain operations, as we found, as we did with payroll, we need payroll to run. We need it to run so fast that we, you know, it's so critical. We ran the checks off ahead of the storm to make sure that they were available at the end of the week, regardless of what happened. So we need to identify those critical functions. Certainly in things like ECC, we have done that, and that's why there are generators in the police department, and we've identified the need for a generator at Ludlow that at least work the lights, because that's where one of our shelters was. We've identified critical resources like our wastewater treatment plant, where there's generators to keep that up and running as they did throughout the storm. So we are looking at, I've tasked Mr. Leslie with putting together that plan on that side to identify those critical resource options and move from there. I see it coming from the IT group is kind of helping steer that, and again, that's why we've asked Mr. Kiley to help out, but it will be a committee that's put together to do that. In terms of whether FEMA will help with that, I don't know. I don't have the answer on that, and in terms of whether our insurance company would provide any breaks if we have that, I don't have that answer either, but that would seem to be one that should be answered as we go through the process.
It just seems to me, thank you for the answer, it just seems to me that this would be of such critical importance. Maybe it ought to not just be based in the IT area, but maybe be something for the chief of staff or somebody who can marshal resources across town departments.
Very good
As
point.
opposed to one functional area.
Yep, very good point.
You know. And then I'll come, Ms. Albin and Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, as the board is aware, Mr. Tetro did, after Storm Sandy, appoint a emergency response evaluation team.
Yes.
That comprises of myself, Mr. Michelangelo, and Deputy Chief Reed. The concept of developing a full disaster recovery plan, operations manual, et cetera, has been a discussion item of that group, and it's a discussion item we're having with Witt Associates. It will cost money to do it.
Is it going to be in the next budget?
That is, the next budget is the one coming up this month.
Right.
Don't know yet.
I'll go to Mrs. Albin and then Mr. Walsh.
Mr. Flynn, you, I think, outlined this very well, but I'll just note one thing. If we had one town hall and not 2 buildings for our town hall offices would probably have a generator. So if we have one at Sullivan Independence Hall so that we can provide the services that we as a town provide to the residents who live here. We have generators at our police and fire because they're needed there so that we can provide service. We have a generator at other places in town where we need to provide service. We have a generator at Sullivan Independence Hall, and if that building were large enough to hold all our town offices, they'd be able to conduct their business. Unfortunately, our town hall offices and services are in 2 buildings, and it seems to me that any comprehensive plan for flood protection, et cetera, would include in the future a generator for that building. A generator, as has already been articulated here by everyone, will service the building whether it's a flood, whether it's a snowstorm, whether it's a windstorm, but we can't operate the building, we can't have the employees in the building, we can't work if we don't have electricity in the building. So, as I said earlier, I don't consider this a luxury. We do need a plan for those buildings that unfortunately sit in the floodplain. We're not going to be moving them up to Greenfield Hill. We can't afford it. So we're going to...
Trees.
There are. So we do need a plan for that, but I just believe this is something that would be incorporated and better to do it now, given what we've been experiencing the last few years.
Thank you, Mrs. Albin. Mr. Walsh?
I guess, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the First Selectman or Mr. Mayor as part of the emergency response team, were any calculations done on the days that we lost when we didn't have services at the town, when the town hall, when the old town hall was down? What value of loss we from paying salaries for people to be home? So we knew what the that cost was.
Yeah, I don't have that number off the top of my head. At the time, we were more focused on the fact that we had services
Sure.
we couldn't provide.
Sure. But no one's done a kind of a cost
I
of
don't have that off the top of my head.
I just did one, just to bet, and, correct me if you think any of these assumptions are wrong, but there's 35 employees that are listed that this would affect, who occupy and work at those buildings on a daily basis. I just took a round number and said, as a salary, $50,000 a person. Might be high, might be low, but it's probably in the
Probably a
ballpark.
tad on the low side.
Probably a tad on the low side. If you took those $50,000 times 35 employees, about $1,750,000 a year, divided by 200 work days, it equals about $8,750 a day. And if you divide that by the cost of $105,000, it works out neatly to 12 days of lost time in that building over the life of this generator would be the break-even point, if those figures are correct, and I know they're very rough, these numbers. How many days were we out for Sandy in that building?
I'm going to say at least 3. I think Tuesday, Wednesday, and I can't remember if we're on Thursday or not.
And there were other dates for the other storms?
Yes.
To me, it's starting to sound like there's a need based on just losing performance from employees from being there, let alone, that doesn't even account for the taxpayers who are trying to get services done, and specifically the payment of taxes, which it worked out this time because the governor, at least on the real estate taxes, extended the grace period for not having to pay a penalty. But from what I understood, that grace period under the law did not apply to WPCA payments.
Yep. And I'm not sure it applied to any motor vehicle payments either.
Yes. It only specifically, that statute, because I looked it up, only applied to real estate taxes, that the governor can do an emergency edict and extend that period.
And just to be clear for everybody, those things are controlled by the state. It's not something we have discretion in terms of it's our fault, so you don't worry about it. We'll cover you on that. We don't have that discretion.
And that's what I understood as well, because I understood that there were some people upset who were trying to say, why can't you cut us a break?
Just
And
a few.
We couldn't do that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Based on that, I'm inclined to vote in favor of this. To me, while I definitely think we need a disaster recovery plan, and I wholeheartedly support that we still need it and should fund it and should get it done, to me, town hall's either open or closed. It's either everyone's there or no one's there. The public either has to know town hall is open or it's closed. And when you give those emergency response things, I think they're great. There's a lot of them. The last thing I want you to start listing is all the departments that are open and those that are closed. So it should be either your town is open or your town is closed. So based on that, I think that, although I don't want to spend it, $105,000 based on being able to use those functions, be able to have those employees instead of home, be at work serving our citizens, it's worth $105,000 over its lifetime.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Others? Mrs. Leclerc?
It's actually kind of coming off a question that you asked originally, and that's with insurance. Do we have flood insurance on this building? Do we have sump pumps that have to run, in the basement?
I believe we have flood insurance on all the buildings in the flood zone.
Okay.
But I'm going to defer to Mr. Mayor on that one because I think he's a little bit more fluent in the flood insurance policy.
It's certainly my understanding that we have flood insurance, and the our insurance agent is here and can address this.
Please, come on up.
Okay.
We're a friendly
that
group.
building?
You can come up.
Thank you.
Please,
Hi.
please introduce yourself, just so
Hi.
we have it for the
Yeah,
record.
I'm Ellen Thies, and I'm the town's insurance consultant with People's United Insurance. And the town's flood insurance is a little bit complicated, so I understand why people have been confused. The town does not buy federal flood insurance, but you do have some flood insurance. Federal flood doesn't cover more than $500,000 on a building, and the town usually takes high deductibles. So with the cost of the federal flood insurance and the low limits, we've looked at it several times, and it didn't make sense. But you have a property policy with KERMA that provides flood coverage, but it provides it differently for buildings in the high-hazard flood zones than outside. And the Army Corps of Engineers decides which is which, and they keep moving the lines. The police station was in the high-hazard flood zone for a while, and now it's out. Town Hall is actually not considered the high-hazard flood zone, unless they changed it within the last couple of weeks. But the way it works, if it's in a high-hazard flood zone, there's a $500,000 deductible per building, another deductible for the contents. So the buildings in the high-hazard zone, there's high deductibles. For the rest of the town, there's a $50,000 flood deductible, and it's per flood, not per building. So, and there's a $10 million limit, so it's not a real high limit. So the town buys a separate policy for an extra $5 million in case that $10 million isn't enough. And the cost of that extra $5 that would apply to any building where you have flood damage was considerably less than buying federal flood on just the buildings in the high-hazard flood zone.
Can I ask her one?
You absolutely can.
But if we had a generator in this building, would that help us at all with the cost of insurance?
Well, it wouldn't affect the flood at all.
Not at all. Okay, being able to pump out water or anything.
No,
like
it's
that.
a
Okay.
flood or it's not a flood.
Okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't, and the federal flood program certainly doesn't care. And with the high deductibles, there's not too much that you can do that's going to really have an impact on the cost. The insurance company, KERMA, may be willing and probably would be to help you with the disaster recovery plan. And certainly in underwriting the better plans you have, it's going to have some impact, but it's not something that you can count on and say, okay, we can defer some of this cost because we'll save it on the insurance, because there's not going to be that much savings.
But they will have a service that can help with the disaster recovery planning.
We can ask them, and I think there's a good chance that they will have, that they will be, they do offer loss control services, and disaster planning is
A
pre-loss control.
service,
I mean,
right.
So I would fully expect that they would be willing to help in that regard.
Mr. Mayor, can we look into that as part of your task force that you're looking at? Thank you very much. Mrs. Leclerc, any other?
I think that's my,
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
I actually wrote out a cheat sheet, which I will leave in case you're like, okay, what did she say? What's
Right.
covered where?
Does anybody have any questions right now on this?
Not right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions, comments, concerns on the amendment before us? Mr. Brown?
It's a question about the town servers. Where are the servers located?
The computer servers.
Yeah, the computer servers.
I have some water.
And backups, Jim? And backups?
And backups.
Okay.
The servers are in the basement of Sullivan Independence Hall.
Okay.
Backup servers are both at Fairfield Woods Library and at Burr Elementary School.
Okay. So the servers are in the building with the generator?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that answers that question. I'll just say this about this, $105,000. Again, I think we do, in this case, we need to protect the infrastructure. I do believe we have to consider productivity, as it's laid out here, and the inconvenience to the town, if the power is out. And you know what? If there's a blizzard and the pipes freeze, and then they blow, it's going to cost a lot more than $100,000 to deal with that, so. Look, last year when we talked about this, and we talked, I think it was Mr. Tetro that said, what if something happens during Election Day, or close to that? And I remember thinking, what are the odds of that? And then on October 29th, that conversation came back to me, and I said, you know what, we may not have power on Election Day. We did not know at that point, so. it's really because of that incident that it has swayed me to vote for this, although I do agree that we do need a disaster recovery plan.
I think everybody's in agreement on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. One of the things you have to be careful of is what you think of during these events. During Irene, our common refrain was, "Thank God it's not snowing." 2 months later.
Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Bowman, based on the last storm, if we were inclined to vote for this, is this going to be raised up a little bit because how high the water got to
The
that
generator,
area?
you mean?
Yeah, is this
We're planning also, we're putting them in to try and raise them all up, yes.
raise all of them
obvious
up,
reason.
not just this one?
Yeah, well, as not raise them all up, but as we do any work on the generators, that we're looking at the treatment plant, for example, their generators are there, we're looking at maybe converting one to natural gas, and in the process raising it up. So even if the flow water, at least it'll continue to run, yeah.
But the $105,000, will that pay for having this at a height that would
Yes.
meet current requirements based on the last storm?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this, to the public on this item? Seeing none, the amendment to take out $105,000 for the generator at Town Hall is before us. That would reduce the bonding amount to $937,000. All in favor of taking this out? Those opposed? Abstentions? None? That amendment fails. Thank you. Now, the item as amended originally is before us. Can I get a motion to get a vote on that? Mr. Polito, do I have a second? Mr. Walsh? The item before us is a bond resolution appropriating an amended amount of $1,037,000 for the costs of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriations is now before us. Any questions, comments, concerns on the item? None from board members to the public? None? Okay, back to us for a vote. All in favor of this appropriation? Those opposed? Abstentions? Item number 1 is done. Mr. Polito, I'll hand it over because we need to speed up.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
a quick comment. I just got a message from Ms. Vahey at home asking us to please talk into our mics better.
Okay.
She says it's not coming through very well.
Yes, Mrs. Albin.
Unless item number 2 is going to be extremely quick, and given that we do have the people from the insurance company here, would it be reasonable to change the order of the agenda so we could hear them first and they could go home?
That's a fair request. I don't anticipate number 2 taking very long, so I would like to just knock that off
Fine.
and be on our way, if that's all right.
Fine.
Rest of the board agree with that?
We promised to knock it off.
Don't worry, I'll knock it off quick, believe me. All right, Mr. Mayor, please.
Yeah, and also Mr. Cleary is here, remember, regarding
Yes,
the bond
thank you.
resolutions.
Let's come on up, Mr. Cleary, please, thanks.
Item number 2 is a resolution amending and restating a resolution adopted March 26, 2012 by the representative town meeting. In that resolution, the town approved $218,000 to remove the underground storage tanks at the Department of Public Works. Subsequent to that work being started, it's been determined that the full cost of that effort is going to require an additional $220,000. So to better track the item, rather than initiating a new resolution for $220,000, we have put before the board a resolution amending the initial resolution,
Okay.
which would bring that number up to, from 218 to 438,000. Actually, 218,500 to 438,500.
So then that would take the total amount from basically 1.8 million to approximately $2 million for the
Correct.
total resolution,
Right,
correct?
1766284 to 1986284.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to go to bond counsel, and then we'll go to the substantive part of it with Mr. Bowman. Attorney Cleary, can you please come up? Thank you. And to Mrs. McCarthy Vahey at home, I hope I'm speaking loud enough here. All right. Is what we're doing legal? Any issues that we need to be aware of?
No, I think this, we tried to make it do it in the most transparent way possible so you
Right.
could track it, and that was our goal.
Okay. In terms of saleability of the bond, no issues with that?
No.
Okay. Any other member of the board have a question for Attorney Cleary on the legalities of the bond resolution? No? All right. Thank you very much, Attorney Cleary. All right, Mr. Bowman, as to the substantive part of this, what happened?
What happened is, as we started doing test holes, to make it simple, we found that the extent of the contamination went further and further on a lateral basis than we had originally assumed. So it spread out over a much larger square footage area, making it harder to treat, or put more wells in until we figure out what the final extent is. Also, then you have to treat that for 5 to 10 years, depending on how you find it and how it's extracted. A more expensive way to extract it would be to dig it all up and treat it, and extract the liquid. This is a way of doing it where you basically, it's an air extraction system. The consultant is here if you want to talk to him about the details of it. But again, it could take from 5 to 10 years. We put enough money for the 10 years in case we need it. We don't want to have to come back again in a few years if we realize it's much further.
So the additional expenditure in your estimation will cover the costs, and you're not going to be coming back looking for more money on this?
That's correct.
All right. This time, I'll turn it over to board members. Any questions for Mr. Bowman on the substantive part of this? Mr. DeWitt, please.
So, just so I understand, so instead of just digging more dirt out, we're going to install a system that will exchange air out of the existing contaminated grounds for a period of 5 to 10 years, is that right?
And it'll treat the air, the bubbles will contain the contaminants, and it's the term air sparging soil vapor extraction system.
Okay.
I have to read that. I don't remember that one.
Okay.
So it's a system that is far less expensive than doing it the other way. If we had a smaller area, deeper containment, you do the other way. You spread it out over this, it could only be 5 feet down, 4 feet down. It's certainly not cost effective to try and do it the other way. Doing it this way, extracting, as part of a vapor system, is actually far cheaper. I mean, just look at the cost of the fire department for 3 or 4 months of treatment. It's extremely expensive. And the other problem is, from DEP informs us, if we don't do it, we're going to you could subject to fines up to $25,000 a day if we refuse to do it. So, not that we're refusing, but that's the worst case scenario there, which would be a lot more costly than spending the money to do it.
Right.
And we've already released the contract to take the tanks out because we don't want to hold up the process, and the construction of new tanks is also being let. So the problem here isn't taking the tanks out and putting new tanks in. It's just, again, the long-term treatment based on what we found, and there are going to be more tests. And may find that it even goes further. That's why we want to make sure we have enough for 10 years rather than just 5 years.
So you're really not sure you understand the total effect here?
No, we do have the consultant here if you want to ask him.
Yeah, no, it seems counterintuitive that digging a bigger hole, and I know it's not that easy, right? Digging a bigger hole is more expensive than putting in a system that we have to monitor for 5 years, but...
Well, you still might be doing it for 5 years, extracting the liquid out for a long period of time. It's just it'd be in one smaller contained area rather than spread out over a larger area. And the liquid extraction is, you're paying to ship volume of liquid off-site to a hazardous waste.
So, and that's the second part of my question. So, we extract this out...
And treat it on site.
We treat it on site?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have to pay anyone anywhere else to take it and dispose of it for us?
I think that's correct. Is that correct?
Please come up to the mic and identify yourself for the record. Thank you.
I don't want to answer too far in this one.
That's all right.
So this is Dennis McCaskey, who from Cambrian Geological Service, who has been
Thank you
doing
for
the
coming.
evening.
No, you go.
As far as disposal of the waste generated, there will be a very small volume of waste which will have to be separately disposed. But in general, this is so far in advance of the other methods as far as being cost effective goes. It's just there's no comparison. If we were to dig this stuff up, you're looking at a hole that would cost $8 to $10 million.
$8 to $10 million.
Yeah, the problem is, the problem is that the release happened before the current generation of tanks were installed. So it's been 30 years sitting there, spreading its little tentacles out, getting bigger and bigger.
Sure.
And there is no zone of high concentration gasoline contamination that we can pick on and say, we got it. We can't do that. If you want to dig it, you have to dig an enormous area, whereas with the air sparging system, which basically is just blowing bubbles into the groundwater.
Right.
And then we're going to, we'll blow the bubbles in. The bubbles will pass through the water. They'll pick up some of the gasoline vapor. They'll pass up out of the water into the soil vapor area. We'll extract that, and that will give rise to some, a relatively minor quantity of waste. At the same time, the bubbles that go into the water will increase the oxygen content of the water, and that will allow the soil bacteria to help degrade the gasoline and eradicate it. So
Right.
it's just way out in front. This is the
Yeah.
most.
You had me at $8 million.
Yeah, this is a lot.
So you're
No,
good, Mr. DeWitt.
I appreciate the process, but I just had no idea we were talking about a number like that. So.
What we really have here is we have a really large zone of relatively low concentration contamination, and the only way we can get that is with with flowing groundwater. So that's where
Thank
we're
you.
coming from.
I'm certainly informed. Any other board members have questions on the substantive part of this? Mrs. Leclerc, please.
I guess this question's for Bob Mayer. Have any of these other projects in this bond resolution been completed, and are they under budget?
Bond resolution, as you know, was adopted in March of last year. I have not tracked any of the other items and really don't know the answer to that question. No, they're all still under,
Okay.
I mean, you're talking about the White School, Jennings School. It's my understanding none of these projects have been completed.
Okay. I was thinking that maybe over the last summer, but okay.
T-Box is done.
Anything else, Mrs. Leclerc? No. Okay, thank you. Anyone else on the board? Seeing none. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Mr.
Can
Flynn,
we,
please.
Mr. Mayor, assuming this passes tonight, before it goes to the RTM, could you please report to them on any other of the projects, the status of them, the funding on them, and whether, so they can take this into account when they review this resolution, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, will do.
Thank you.
All right, one last time, board members? Okay, we'll go to the public. Any comments, questions on this resolution? Seeing none. Coming back to the board, last chance? No? All right. Before us is to hear, consider, and act upon a resolution amending and restating a resolution adopted March 26, 2012 by the representative town meeting, which will change the overall amount from $1,766,284 to $1,986,284. Can I have a motion? Mr. Brockfeld, seconded by Mr. Flynn. All in favor? That is unanimous, 9-0-0. Thank you very much, appreciate it. And I see that Selectman McCarthy Vahey is here because she couldn't hear us on television, so thanks for coming. And back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, for our next two-hour item.
That took, what, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, just remember how quickly Mr. Bolito got through this.
Keep it up, Mr. Stone. All right. Let's see if you get recognized for the next couple of Item number 3, discussion of flood insurance coverage, presented by Ellen Thies, account manager of Beardsley, Brown, and Bassett. Welcome back.
This was going
Deja vu.
This was when I was going to introduce Ellen, but when you started to talk about flood insurance, she could not contain herself.
She just jumped up and ran up here.
excited about this.
Yeah. Please, why don't we turn it over to you?
Knowledgeable.
Did you give your presentation just a few minutes ago, or do you have
Yes,
more?
that's, unless you had other questions or wanted to discuss other insurance-related issues. I was asked to explain the flood insurance, and sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe I've already explained it, but
Are there any other questions following up on that conversation? Mr. Belita?
Yes, you alluded to it, I just want to make sure I understand it. If a property is in a flood zone, that puts it in that $500,000 deductible range, correct?
if it's in a high-hazard
High
flood
hazard,
zone-
right, you delineated that,
Yes,
okay.
the high-hazard flood zone has a $500,000 deductible per building.
Right. And the rest of the town buildings that are not in a high-hazard flood zone, we're talking about a $50,000 deductible.
And that's per flood, not per building.
Okay. So basically, you have an event, and the deductible's based on that event. You're not going through each individual facility.
No, if it had gotten City Hall is not considered a high hazard.
Right.
So if it had gotten City Hall and then a couple of other buildings that way, and according to FEMA, about 50% of floods are outside of the high-hazard flood zones.
Okay. Thanks, that clears it up. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, just one comment you might make is there is a difference in our deductibles between our flood insurance deductibles and deductibles for other damages to buildings. You might
Yes.
point that out.
Okay. For fire, windstorm, and, all of the other normal, hurricane, all the normal stuff, there's a $100,000 deductible per event. And it doesn't make any difference if those buildings are in the flood zone or not, because those deductibles are only for flood. So for the windstorm, the damage to the roof at the school, that's a $100,000 deductible, the same as it would be if it was a fire or damage at any other town building.
Thank you for that. On that, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Tetro, regarding the incident at the school, since it was just brought up, what's the current status on this? Do we know what the amounts are? Do we know what needs to be done, and what's going on?
Kerma has been out and has acknowledged responsibility.
So they caused it?
Responsibility for paying for it.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you for making sure I'm not lazy with my language. The bills will be submitted directly to Kerma. Kerma will pay. We will be subjected to our $100,000 deductible.
How are we going to pay for that $100,000 deductible?
I don't think that's my decision as of right now, however. There has been no resolution prepared,
No recommendation as of this time?
no recommendation from the administration.
Is there any other costs that we're going to be on the hook for because of this, other than the $100,000 that we know of?
Not that I'm aware of. It's my understanding that it's all covered, they're handling it. We don't even have to worry about processing the bills, except for in fact, we pay the last $100,000, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And things like custodial overtime, that's included as part of the claim.
Okay. Okay, did you come up with a rough estimate of what this is going to cost at this time in total, regardless of the $100,000?
No, I have not been that involved in the claim itself.
Okay.
It's mostly gone through directly
Yeah,
between the town and the insurance
With
company.
the insurance
I'm-
adjuster.
Right, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm the outside consultant.
right.
I'm just the middleman.
Did you, another question on this, did they say when it's going to be repaired, what's going to happen with that?
I don't have that. I don't recollect that. I'd be speculating. I wouldn't want to talk to that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walsh?
What's the financial health of Kerma now? From what I understand, they've been taking on massive claims.
They tell me that they're fine. I have not seen any financial report within the last couple of months, so but they do reinsure. They do not take all of the risk.
Okay.
They take a portion of the risk, and I believe Lexington is their primary reinsurer, which is part of AIG, and it's an A-plus rating.
But that's something that, as part of your services, you monitor on behalf of the town, their financial health, and then would provide us if you thought that they were starting to become a problem, so we could place our insurance someplace else?
Yes,
Okay. So you'll let the risk manager know if that becomes a problem?
absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, thank you for coming out tonight. We appreciate
You're
you
welcome.
waiting.
No
Thanks.
problem, I'm not paid by the hour.
There you
Stick around.
Thank you. I think she's enjoyed your company.
We're just getting started. All right, item number 4, to receive and consider the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2012, as prepared by Cohn Resnick LLP. Hello, Mr. Centofanti. One of our favorite people.
Thanks.
Hello, sir. Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
All right. So I'm going to walk through this presentation. It's set up very similar to prior years, a couple new things. So I'm going to talk about basically 3 documents that you have. The CAFR is the light color green, the federal and state single audit with the Cohn Resnick cover, and then the required communication also with the Cohn Resnick cover. So again, the objectives, we're going to talk about the audit, the various reports that we did issue. We'll look at the recommendations, which are in the required communications, talk about the required communications and some future things that are coming up down the road. So we talked about the several reports that were issued. So starting again with the CAFR on page 8 of the big green book.
Given at the last meeting. With a note that said bring it to this meeting.
You had that note?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm to embarrass myself here.
Here it is. You want to say the number?
I didn't need proof, Mr. Wall.
All right.
An 18-point tie.
Yeah.
So again, the opinion on the financial statements is an unqualified, clean opinion. We had no scope limitations or accounting problems or issues. Starting on page 10, again, is the management discussion analysis. Again, it's a good summary of what happened during the year, the changes as compared to prior year. On page 14, talk about fund balance, and we have a couple charts, as we have had in prior years, that we'll look at of where your fund balance has been trending. Again, the internal service funds, what their operations were for the year, where that ended. And again, we have some specific slides to talk about the details of that one. General fund budgetary operations, so some of the changes in the budget during the year, the transfers, those type of things are discussed at the top of page 15. Capital asset activity and those changes, and then the long-term debt, very similar to the last several years. So again, this gives you kind of the big executive summary of what happened, and then the footnotes are in much more greater detail as far as what specifically changed. So on page 4 of the slide, some of the notable items: increase in accrued payroll, which we'll see on page 21, increase in tax overpayments of $510,000. Again, those were literally the overpayments that came in during the year, which was a much larger number than previous years. Related to the internal service, the workers' comp claim, there was an increase due to an old claim that exceeded the max insurance, And I think a lot of these things have been talked about previously. And then the railroad station project footnote is still in the report for this year. The project did wrap up, so that note probably will not be shown next year. And looking at page 21, the unassigned fund balance is the 14,593,000. So your total fund balance is about almost the same as last year, just a 0.1% decrease, the unassigned fund balance. The rating agencies, again, last year was 5 to 10%. They keep talking more 10 to 15. And as part of managing fund balance, and I think we'll talk about it later, we do recommend the board adopt a formal policy on fund balance of where the board would like to see the fund balance and what the actions would be if you had amounts above that, and how you would adopt budgets if their amounts were below the projected range in that policy.
Mr. Centofanti, do you have examples of policies that have been adopted by other municipalities related to that?
Yes. I know I've sent Bob one example, that there are a couple different ones, but usually it's more about what the range is and then maybe what the uses are.
Could you get us a couple of examples and send them to me, and I'll distribute them, or we'll distribute them to the board?
Sure.
Chairman, are we asking questions along the way or holding them to the end of his presentation?
I was going to hold mine to the end of the
Okay.
presentation, but feel free if somebody has a question that they want to shout out. Please do. I wanted to make sure, they're recommending that we do something
Yes.
here, so I wanted to make sure that we had this one on the.
Okay.
Do you have a question on this?
You mentioned that there's been some type of change, that they're actually looking for AAA communities, that we go to 10 to 15%, because this number seems to keep creeping up. Under Mr. Flato's previous administration, we were being told that it should be at 5. Okay, and then Mr. Tetro advised us later on that no, it really should be closer to 10%. So we should probably try to start increasing it to get to 5 to 10. Now you're selling 10 to 15. I mean, this number keeps going up, and yet we just went down, and we're like on the border of 5.
Right. I mean, the rating agencies have been pushing, last year, the same presentation, I said 5 to 15. It was pretty broad of a range. But they're leaning more towards the 10%. So I updated this to say 10 to 15. And then we're going to talk about, in a couple slides, if we look at what GFOA recommends, they say 2 months operating expenses. So that's 16.67%. Again, all this is, I guess I'm providing you this as perspective and information, and not necessarily making any specific recommendation. But this is what's out there as far as what's being talked about, those levels. Again, GFOA does say that the larger communities with a more diverse revenue base may need less of a fund balance because you're not reliant on one particular thing. That's, fortunately, in Connecticut, that's not so much the case, since we rely so much on property taxes. But again, part of what my goal was just to kind of give you the different things that are being, the different levels that are out there. But 5% is, I would say, on the lower end. Again, you're at the minimum of what they're normally looking for.
Do you have any new reports or any literature you could supply with our board to show that it should be 10 to 15%, or what they're talking about?
To page 7.
Page
7.
Well, page 7 is the GFOA guidance, which is even a little higher than that. And that's a recommended policy at no less than 2 months. And then I put the footnote in there to say that, again, we're talking unrestricted fund balance, that larger governments may be lower, but they do caveat it that it's specific to a government's circumstances. So not everyone would need 16%. So I can look for something specific as far as the rating agencies.
Yes.
They're the ones that more of a driver. GFOA
Yes.
is a recommended practice.
That's what I was getting at. Do you have anything from the rating agencies where they discuss it, or can get it to us in the future?
Yeah, I will try to find something specific.
Great, thank you.
All right, so on page 6, again, is the trending of your fund balance, from 2005 forward. So as you can see, the fund balance number, absolute dollars, has been increasing, but obviously your budget has been increasing also, so that hasn't changed the percentage. Again, on page 7, the policy, again, just from another perspective of what's out there. And then page 8 is another specific that breaks the fund balance down by the categories. Again, the unrestricted number, the 14,593,000, is what everybody focuses on. Page 9 is just the reconciliation of the fund balance, where it was last year. Operations increased it by the 1.6 million, and then encumbrances increased from the prior year. Again, those being committed amounts, so it reduced the undesignated as compared to prior year to end at the 14,593 that we just talked about. And looking at page 26 is the budgetary statement. So this is the budget and actual, the original budget, final budget.
Go to 10. Here's for reference.
The net increase in fund balance here was 829,000. Basically, the difference between the 1,687 we looked at for GAAP and what's here is the change in encumbrances and the prior year accrued payroll, which was only booked prior year for GAAP, which was recorded for budget this year. So that resulted in that 829. Revenue overall and total, we're looking at the variance column, 292,000 more in revenue than what was budgeted. On the expenditure side, you spent 676,000 less than what was budgeted. So that contributed substantially to what the increase, the net result of the 829. Internal service funds are on pages 27 through 29. Looking at page 28, third line from the bottom, the operating income or loss for the internal service funds was 108,000, so pretty much a break-even year. Again, this is considering the 900,000 additional claim that was booked for the claim that's going to potentially go past insurance. So without that claim, you would have had $1 million operating income for the year. Again, looking at the calculation as far as the fund deficit, the long-term versus short-term, the difference now is 2.425 million, which is up from $1,150,000. So you're making some ground there as far as current assets are available to pay current liabilities with a $2.4 million cushion. Again, the total fund still has a deficit of 4.6 million at June 30. Again, on page 12, just a reminder of the different types of risks that you are self-insuring in this fund: the workers' compensation, the general and property liability, the town and board active medical, and the Board of Ed retiree medical. Moving on to the pension funds, the detailed financial statements are on page 56 and 57, which show each of the pension funds separately. On page 30, it shows them combined. The increase in or decrease in net assets for the year for the town plan was an increase of 849,000. Again, this is considering a change in the fair value of investments of a decrease of 2.1 million. For police and fire, there was a decrease in net assets of almost 2.5 million, and the majority of that, the 2.1 million, was related to the decrease in fair value of the investments. Looking at the funded ratio, the town decreased slightly from the 101.1 to 98.5%, decreased at 2.6%, and the police and fire decreased 4.1%. Again, we still have that five-year smoothing in effect that's driving those ratios. So we're still phasing in the 20% of the down markets, which hasn't caught up. So the investment rate of return for the pension plans for this year was decreased from 8 to 7.75%. And that would have had an impact on your budget and what your recommended contribution was. The trend in the market right now in most towns is to move that number to 7%. So everybody is moving that backwards. If we look at the
Yes, please.
But, Mr. Nafani, so I just want this clear, we haven't done that. You're saying that the...
You moved it back a quarter point.
I understand. In
Yeah.
fact, I think, to be fair, we actually, I think, are moving it to 7.5
No,
this coming year.
Okay.
But you're saying that the trend or the recommendation or the prudent way to handle this is to move it towards 7?
Right.
Based on your experience?
Yeah, based on my experience, most of the communities are moving it back to 7%.
Are any going lower than 7%?
You know, I've heard one or two actuaries say 6.75 is probably the better number, but 7% seems to be the general consensus of where.
Let me ask just one other thing, Tom. Let me ask
Please.
a slightly different question. So that's very good information. I appreciate that. Is the fact that we're at what sounds like a elevated level compared to what's recommended or prudent, is that in of itself a warning flag to a rating agency that could theoretically put our rating at risk?
It certainly will factor into some of their judgments. We'll talk about at the end that the pension standards are going to change in 2 years, where all that is going to be taken off the table, and they're going to force some more standardization of way that's calculated. So GASB kind of went ahead and addressed that and finally did something to force some standardization because nothing is really comparable.
Right. So
So
you're
that-
going to address that as we go
I'll
forward?
talk about that a little bit more, which will, you know, this discount rate is a big factor in that standardization, of what rate you're allowed to use
Right.
will relate to level.
Why don't we address as you bring it
Okay.
up then? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Jim Brown's got a quick question on this, too.
Quick question on, you mentioned communities, there's a trend in communities. How do we find out which communities? Can you help us with that? You're talking about municipalities?
Yeah, I think, yes. The actuaries are going to probably have a better handle on that because they're the ones making some of the recommendations and talk about that. I certainly can attempt to get some of that information from not only, you know, your actuarial firm, but the, you know, other ones that I do work with as far as that, and I do.
Just like to compare those municipalities to Fairfield, see which ones they are.
Yep.
All right,
Yep,
thank
a
you.
lot, they're all different,
That's fine.
but, okay, so I'll see what I can find out there. And just for perspective, and again, these are long-term rates of return. The 7% goal was supposed to be a long-term rate. Your return last year was 0.81%. And again, that's just a 1 year, but just for perspective. 0.81, yes, not even 1%, yes.
Not 81.
Don't worry, snap on you.
On page 14 of the presentation, the funded ratios, again, I'm just giving you the perspective, showing you what the market value rates are. So the funded ratio at market value actually went up from 92 to 94% for town, and police and fire went up from 93 to almost 96%. So that's by looking at the RSI and the fair values reported on the pension financials versus using the smooth fair value number that the actuary calculates. So on a fair value basis, which I will tell you is part of that last thing, is where you're going to have to be anyway. The smoothing will kind of go away for presentation purposes. So everybody will be at fair value 3 years from now. The OPEB funds, again, the details are on page 63 and 64. The liabilities at June 30 were $7 million for town, police and fire 8.6, and Board of Ed 3.1. All of them increased roughly $500,000. Again, this measurement, again, what they did for pension, this type of measurement's going to go away. OPEB, they haven't done it yet, but that will eventually go away, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. The annual required contribution that was made in 2012 for town and police and fire, you're at 91% versus 87 and 78 in the prior year, and the Board of Ed a little bit lower. The Board of Ed's not a funded plan, so that percentage is not as concerning. The town plan, the goal was that you'd be at 100% for June 12, so you're pretty close. So hopefully you'll be able to maintain that level. On page 16, it's been a few years, so I just figured I'd put in this chart of some of the recoveries of what's happened with the Madoff loss. The number I didn't have was the actual cash loss, but the loss we showed in the financial statements in 2008 was the $40 million. That's what was recorded at that point. And then since then, you've had recoveries and related expenses, and all these are detailed right in the financial statements. So net recoveries of 10.2 through June 30, 12.
Can I ask you a question while we're there?
Please.
Are these all the recoveries that we're going to get? Do you know? Have you been advised of that? Or can somebody from the administration discuss whether there's going to be any potential further recoveries? I guess this question's directed to the fiscal officer, since the first selectman seems to have left the building.
He had to leave. He has an early meeting in Hartford, so he was kind enough to let me know. So
There is a remaining outstanding lawsuit that the town is engaged in. Lawyers are acting 100% contingency, with the exception of expenses, of course, where the town is hoping to recapture additional funds.
I think this is a good page to have in here. I appreciate you putting it in there, and I would hope that we could continue that next year, see how we do. Thanks.
Yep, I'll definitely make sure I update it. So that was most of the highlights, again, of the CAFR. I'll go through single audit quickly, unless you want to ask questions on the CAFR.
I'm going to reserve my right to go back to the CAFR in a few
Okay.
minutes, but I'd like to hear the rest of your presentation
All right.
first. I don't know if others feel the same.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
Okay, for federal single audit, it's one of the small Cohn-Resnick ones.
Yep.
Again, on page 1 and 2 of that report, it shows you all the federal monies that was spent by the town. We had, as in prior years, unqualified opinion on compliance. We had no findings or question costs. Again, the FEMA program, the monies that you received last year related to that are included in this. So the FEMA monies last year were $863,000, and we did audit those as part of this audit. Again, state single audit, which is very similar to federal, on page 10, lists all the state money expended by the town, which totaled a little over $18 million. Again, there was no findings, no question costs, no compliance issues. And I think the final portion of the railroad project expenditures, related to the state funding was reported in this report. The next document is the other Cohn-Resnick report that it's labeled required communications.
Yeah, okay.
So in here, the first item is SAS 114 letter. And on page 1, it talks about the significant estimates that we reviewed and considered, the incurred but not reported, which related to the internal service fund. Workers' comp liability, again, internal service fund, heart and hypertension, the net pension asset, and the net other post-employment benefits obligations. So as part of the audit, we do look at those and test those estimates and the assumptions related to those items. As far as the disclosures, all the financial statement disclosures are neutral, consistent, and clear. We didn't have any difficulty in completing the audit. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements, we'll look at. I included those in here. I also just included the representation letter, again, for your perspective. It's quite long and detailed, of 37 different items of the representations that were made by management as part of the audit. Fairly consistent with prior year, so I will leave that for your reference. The unrecorded adjustments are reported on page 10, and it's broken down by the different types of opinion units or financial statements. So government-wide, which contains all the opinion units, the general fund separately, and then the non-major funds separately. And then finally, and here is the recommendations. So the first two recommendations are a repeat from the prior year.
Mr. Centofanti, what was the special revenue one? I can't remember that one.
It's related to GASB 54 and the classification of funds. I think you're going to consider resolving that right after
Right.
this. So basically, 54 define what a special revenue fund, and the level of fund balance, or the category of fund balance, is driven by the level of restriction, and the board, the governing body, should approve all the funds that the town has, currently, and then any new funds should be approved by the board before they're set up.
Okay.
So this kind of memorializes, some of them could have been approved along the way, but this kind of just cleans it up because it does affect the presentation.
Okay.
So the investment classifications, again, that was recurring, and it's just working with the vendor. The special revenue we just talked about. The new comments this year relate to the Public Works project record keeping. Just the detailed records need to reconcile with the payroll records as far as when you're trying to charge time to projects. And I think since you've hired a consultant, that's something I'm sure that will be looked at. The 2013 budget and contingency that put in there just as a reminder. I think you were aware of that, but based upon the way that the town has settled contracts, that's something to be aware of as you go through 2013.
So that point is basically the fact that we should budget a contingency for the union contract settlements. Is that correct?
Right, and I think the amount that's there might not...
Is not going to cover.
Is not going to be adequate, right, so it's just something to keep on the radar as you go through the year.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. DeWitt?
I want to take you back on the Public Works. So we know how many hours the employees work because we're paying them by the hour, right? But we don't know what project they're working on. That's correct?
But I think there were some records that were in the Public Works Department, and they didn't reconcile directly or clearly to the payroll records. We'll say a lot of it could have been more of a timing thing. So we wrote down they spent 10 hours overtime working on FEMA on this day or this week, then we should be able to see a straight line to that's what they got paid for that week. There wasn't any problem within the big picture of the work that we did. It didn't line up initially.
Right. I guess I'm a little confused because I thought Munis kind of handled all that stuff. Doesn't Munis keep hourly track of employees and overtime and that kind of stuff?
It gets input into Munis from a person in Public Works who, they have a separate subsystem by project tracking all their employees' times. It then gets input into Munis to actually pay the person.
Oh.
That's where the hourly rate is kept in Munis.
Gotcha. And your work found some inconsistencies with the inputs and the outputs.
Correct, correct. And it kind of flows into the next comment related to the capital assets, because you do a lot of road construction, and that would be another area where you'd want to be capturing the time spent on doing that and capitalizing that as part of the value of the road, which I think it's being done in some format, but it's a little bit informal. So this kind of was
Yeah.
saying, kind of formalize this process for whatever project the town may be doing, that they wanted to be able to capture the area or capture the amount of time for whatever accounting purpose.
Right. The only reason I bring this up is because this board especially, many, many times, Public Works Director, plural, right, have come before us and said, here's a new thing that we didn't know about 2 months ago, and they go, got it. And we always ask, what's not going to happen because you're doing this new thing? And they go, no, we'll cover it all. So I don't think anybody would debate, disagree with you that we need to better control that, right?
At this point, one of the items, because that's the end of your management recommendations, one of the things we've asked for in the past is for the finance department, the CFO, to actually write responses after this report has been issued as to how you're going to address the recommendations, whether they're going to be addressed, whether they're not going to be addressed, and why. And I would ask that at some point in the future, maybe our quarterly meeting, that we get a response back from management, as it were, on the auditor recommendations, so that we can know that progress is being made, or we're at the point where we're going to live with the issue as a risk. That'll be known as well. All right? And we can communicate that back to our auditors as well, so.
Right, which is something we asked for in planning.
Right.
Like how'd you do?
For next year.
Right, so,
Right.
so we can check as we go along, so.
Good. And then you've got the new pronouncements.
Right, the new, there's a couple of deferred inflows and outflows, because assets and liabilities weren't enough. We want a couple new categories, so going forward, we'll complicate the balance sheet a little bit more with that. Accounting and reporting for service and concession arrangements, I didn't think you had any until I heard of Parks and Rec earlier, so that may apply to you depending on how those agreements are set up. If it's just the lease agreement, it probably doesn't apply. Financial reporting entity, component units, was GASB 14, was GASB 39, now it's GASB 61. They just keep tweaking it, so I don't think it'll have a big impact, but it'll just require us to reevaluate some of the boards and commissions to see whether they should be part of the reporting entity. The codification is kind of just dealing with FASB, created a codification, got rid of all their numbers, so GASB just now has to reformat the way they look at all the information before 11/30/89, which is when GASB kind of became effective. In 2014, items previously reported as assets and liabilities, that ties into the deferred outflows and inflows, and that relates to derivative accounting and the concession arrangements, so that probably won't apply. Technical corrections allows you to use a different fund for self-insuring. Right now, you're only allowed to use general or internal service, and this allows you now to use a different fund following GASB 54, how you classify a fund as special revenue or cap projects, that type of thing. And then for the two fund ones, the financial reporting for pension plan, 67, and accounting and financial reporting for pensions, 68. Those are the big changes that are coming up. What they're gonna, the biggest change that they're gonna do is if you had this big report, but your actuarial accrued liability number, if we looked at page 65 of the larger report, for July 1, 2011 is 156 million. You know, what the new standard is going to do is say you need to put that on your balance sheet now minus your assets. So you're in good shape as far as you're pretty close to being fully funded. But there's a lot of communities that's going to have a significant impact. And we look at those top statements, it's going to put a lot of people into deficit positions. So that's probably the biggest thing. Again, that's also where it's going to force that fair value accounting, because that's what your pension financial statements are. And then it's also going to restrict, again, the discount rate is going to be more looked at, that you have to, there has to be some support that you're actually earning that rate over long term, and that you have enough assets there to really make a difference at that rate, that you can use that rate. Otherwise, you're going to have to use the Treasury rates, which again is.
And you said OPEB isn't going to that right away, but they will follow suit eventually.
Right, because it's the same, they're the same exact statements as pension, but they just did pension first, because there's been more focus on that. So it also expand this RSI that we look on page 65 to 10 years, so it's just going to provide a lot of more information. It's also going to fix, the actuarial method that everyone has to use for financial statement reporting, the same calculation method. Again, so it will standardize a lot. You'll be able to compare town to town for once, which right now you really can't do.
Okay.
So those are the big things coming down the road as far as that goes.
Thank you for a great report. I appreciate it. Every year it gets better and better for us to walk us through. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I know I do, if others don't. The first thing, okay, go ahead, Mr. Walsh. I didn't see it. Sorry.
It's, the general fund balance as a percentage is just getting very disconcerting. The fact that we have to keep going up, at least for what the credit agencies are looking for, let alone the other standards that you represented. So if you can get us that information, that'd be helpful, because I know the first selectman stated he would like to start getting closer to the 10%. This year we actually went down, and it's becoming more concerning, and I'm starting to question at what point a credit agency is going to start raising that issue. I have to say that the rate of return on the pension's also very concerning, because we've been told every year that, that we went down to 7.75. Now we're starting to hear it should be at 7%. We raise this question all the time, and people try to defend it and all sorts of other things, but especially if we're going to have to start reporting what that is and start trying to really justify that, we're going to have to get really serious about what that number is in the future. So it's another very disconcerting number, when we just came down, but only came down a little bit. It seems like that number should start dropping a lot faster. Do you disagree with that, based on what you're seeing in the industry?
No, I mean, it's not uncommon to be phasing it down a quarter point, because it does obviously impact your budget. So that is the trend.
And especially with the returns that you're seeing, right? That we're getting, 0.81%.
Right.
When we're saying it's 7.75%.
Right, because that's your long-term planning, that you have to hit that number, otherwise your contributions are going to go up slower than if you adjusted right down to 7, but.
And let alone some of the pension amounts that seem to start going up, specifically some of the stuff with the fire that we've been learning about, but with people who are going to start retiring a lot sooner, is getting also, the history is also getting very concerning. With Brian Vahey's report, and while it seems like we're in a good position, some of these numbers are concerning, that we're not in a great position. And I think we're going to keep, but I will pass it on to Mr. Brockfield, who's... Yeah, that's fine. I'm done. Thank you.
Everything, I agree with Mr. Walsh. What concerns me, and it's a little frustrating because I've, with the support of the board, have raised this year after year after year, is that what we asked for years, and only got it in part last year, if I'm correct, is a picture of what our, and this is not directed at you, Mr. Sinema, is a picture of what our ARCs would be in the future at varying rates of return. Right. Because all we keep seeing is this is the ARC, and it's bad enough, by the way, at 7.75 or at 8 or at 7.5 where we're going, when in fact we've asked for levels at 7 and 6 and 5, just to pick numbers, maybe 4. And and now we're finding out, obviously, that we're going to be heading in that direction anyway, or we should be. And to me, it seems that, I'm a bit off topic here, but I think it's appropriate, is that we have a capital planning workshop coming up. I forget the date, but it's in the very near future. And
Thursday.
That is the definition of the near future. And
We might still be here.
yeah, that's right. That's right. In fact,
You keep
in fact,
going, we
in
can
fact,
just camp here.
Mr. Stone is going to go back out to the vending machine and get us some snacks to tide us through. But quite seriously, I think one problem that we have in general is that we've not been holistic enough in the way we approach our future planning. And I think we've made tremendous improvements, and I give credit to this board and to Mr. Tetro, Mr. Mayor, and others who have been involved. But, for example, how do we actually do a capital planning workshop and a waterfall bond chart and not understand in the context what the possibilities are for our ARCs on pension and our eventual, I don't know if it's called the ARC on the OPEB as well, but I guess it is. So I'm riffing a bit here, but I just think that in other words, I'm getting uncomfortable just in general voting on capital planning, capital projects that stretch out 10, 15 years out in the road, 20 years down the road, without knowing the full picture of our, in other words, the waterfall chart's only one part of the puzzle as to what our future expenses will be in this town, right? And I'm bringing it up now, it doesn't exactly direct to what you're doing here, but you have brought it up, and you've brought us some new information, which we appreciate.
Right.
And I just think it's important that we all think about that, and also about what we request in terms of what information is provided to us
For about,
from the actuaries.
yeah, for about 7 years, the topic around this table, the tactical topic has always been tax increases, right? The long-term topic has always been our long-term exposures, whether that be, that was the whole genesis of the capital planning workshop, because that is something that we can actually control that's not based on assumptions, right? So we can control that by approving it or not approving it, and by working with the administration and for the fine work that was done getting good interest rates and the things of the like. What's disconcerting is, I agree with you to a point, Mr. Brockfield, because I think over the past several years, we made great strides at getting the requested information. It's taken a hell of a long time to get there, but we've gotten some of that information. What's disconcerting, and what we have to remember as we go through the budget process, in my opinion, is that we're struggling to keep up. Where we think we're actually increasing taxes to address these issues so that we better our situation, year after year, we're shown that it hasn't bettered our situation. So we've added to the general fund over the last years. They moved the marker on us. We've added to the pension fund, started contributing after a 10-year hiatus with the pension fund. We're still now below 100% funded on a fair market basis. Still much better than a lot,
Right.
right?
Definitely,
But that's
yes.
grading us on a curve,
Right.
right?
Yep.
You factor OPEB in there, it was actually this board, I think, that pushed to get us to start funding OPEB. But we're significantly below where we need to be with OPEB, and by the way, it was our target to get to 100% of funding of the ARC, of required ARC, and we're now at 91%, which means we got to go up again, right? Then you add in the most concerning part over the last 2 years, which has been the internal service fund, where we significantly added to that as well, and yet those claims are outpacing, and in fact, we had a marginal betterment of that fund. So as we head into budget time, we got to remember that, because these are obligations. And a certain number of them are going to change because they're based on actuarial calculations anyway. But it's frustrating to sit here and see that we're not as good as we had hoped to be. And remember, in these pension numbers, we put in over $800,000 additional last year. Well, actually, that, in fairness, that hasn't come up yet. That's in the coming year. That's in the coming year, so I take that back. But we know we have 4.7 million staring us in the face.
Can I say one? And
Yeah.
I agree with everything you said, but I think how I would summarize what you said and to support it is that what's frustrated me in the way we approach the numbers is that I feel like we're looking at everything on a static basis.
Yeah.
And we're not looking at things on a dynamic basis. And what I mean by that is exactly what you're saying. In other words, and
I
I'm
think that's fair.
I'm a bit of a broken record on this because I've said this year after year, but it's not good enough to just say, well, this is the arc for the next 5 years based on 7 3/4 today.
Right.
We know, I mean, no person would retire, I think, on an investment portfolio and just say, well, I think I'm going to get 7% a year for the rest of my life.
Right.
I'm going to start, buying plasma TVs and taking vacations based on that. I mean, they would ask their advisor or run a spreadsheet and say, well, what happens if I earn 2%? What happens if I earn 4%? And I don't think we've asked ourselves those questions on either the pension investments or a whole range of the things that you just discussed. And so, again, I just think that we're asking the right questions. Now the question is, and I think we also have an administration that is willing to work with us on this, I believe, and willing to give us more information than we've gotten in the past and to be more responsive. So I guess the question for us is it's incumbent upon us to make the request.
But by the way, to your point, these are the key drivers of our budget increases year after year.
Yeah.
These are crowding out the ability to do other things.
Right, but there's two things
Yep.
going on simultaneously, right? We have to deal with a budget for
Yep.
the year 2014. I'm always terrible with this fiscal year thing, but I think it's 2014.
It is.
And at the same time, so those are short-term decisions we simply have to make. But then there are longer-term decisions we make, which basically are capital planning decisions, I think, alongside all these other expenses such as pension and OPEB. And I just don't think we're necessarily looking at them in a holistic way when we decide, can we afford to do $12 million for this? And we have to say, well, wait a minute, if our pension funds only return 4%, which is a decent chance, maybe we can't afford a $12 million project. And I think that we need to look at things together. That's
Well,
all.
I think we need to be more strategic, and we have to realize that these expenses are not going anywhere but up.
And that seems to be the trend, yeah.
Mr. Brown?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe about 3-4 years ago, and I think it was Mr. Brackfels and I's first year on the finance board, that we had asked H&H to present to us some options. And they actually gave us a proposal. And I think, if I remember right, they asked for $25,000 to do such a proposal.
Yep.
And I do not believe the previous administration took them up on that.
They did not, correct.
So maybe it's something we can look at, bring them up again. The proposal to look at various options on what-if scenarios. When I say options, I'm talking about the options that we face, on what-if scenarios, on different discount rates, but also different avenues on how to provide a retirement program to our employees.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, what it was basically a soup to nuts analysis of our retirement plans for all the unions, where it stands now, what the options are for the future, and what's the most cost-effective way for the town to proceed. I still got the thing sitting on my desk. For $25,000, they were going to give us a wholehearted analysis and objective opinion about which way to go, and the previous administration basically put the kibosh on it, and it's been sitting there ever since. It's never been done. That's what we're talking about.
And we actually did have a similar analysis done. It wasn't by Hooker and Holcomb, I don't believe, but we had a similar analysis done that was benchmarking the benefits that we provide our employees versus other towns. And that was carried through on the actual benefits.
It sounds like what you're looking for is an understanding of what the growth of the liability is going to be, to make a decision over a period of time what the rate of return would need to be to match that, to maintain 100% funded rate.
It wasn't just that, no. It was actually to provide more information to the previous administration as they went into their negotiating with the unions over their contracts and lay out a variety of options. Probably the easiest way to go through it is for Mr. Bolito to provide to you what he has sitting on his desk, because it
Right.
spelled out what we were trying to do was provide information to the administration as to what the financial ramifications of agreements and contracts might be over a longer-term period.
Look forward to reviewing that.
Mrs. McCarthy-Vehy, please. Thanks for coming out, and we're sorry the microphones
Thank you.
didn't work.
And I'm not here because I couldn't hear, and I do appreciate you recognizing me. I was here for this report. Thank you very much. As I listened to the conversation, I think some really great points have been made and some great conversation. It just occurs to me as a brainstorm that given some of the new information that's been provided and the concern that we all share in terms of pension and OPEB, that at some point, and again, this is a brainstorm, that this board may be well-served by actually sitting down with the pension board in its entirety, rather than simply having a report, being able to have a back-and-forth conversation together as a group so that everyone is in the same place and hearing the same things and understanding each other's concerns. And I'm just suggesting that for your consideration. I will certainly share that with Mr. Tetro when I see him again, but it might make sense.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I don't, by the way, I don't want to leave the impression, at least for myself, that this is just a pension and OPEB issue. There's many other factors. There's the general fund. There's the internal service fund, which obviously is partially OPEB, but it's partially active medical and partially workers' comp and all that. So there's a lot. It's not just those two issues, but there's a lot of upwards pressure. And let's not forget our state is in dire straits and what's going to happen with the funding we get from the state, to the extent we get some. So, do we have any other questions, comments on the report? I do have a few, but due to the lateness of the hour, I might just follow up with you separately, if it's okay, Mr. Sanafani?
Absolutely.
As opposed to keep people here. Thanks. So, thank you very much. Ladies, thank you for coming out tonight for this. I think we need Mr. Sanafani maybe for 5, which is to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution, which you alluded to. In accordance with GASB 54, the Board of Finance of the Town of Fairfield approves the special revenue funds and related fund balance classifications identified on pages 74 to 76 of the 2012 CAFR. So let's refer to those pages, please. And these are just a reporting mechanism, correct?
Right. What that's doing for some of the special revenue funds,
Can you speak into the mic? We can't hear you.
sorry, is to say that the revenues that are going into these funds are committed to these purposes. So,
Got
for,
it.
downtown parking and WPCA is separate by statute, but for the library and those type of things, that the board is agreeing these revenue streams are committed for that purpose.
Got it. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on this item? No? Questions, comments from the public? No? Can I have a motion? Mr. Polito, can I have a second? Mr. DeWitt? The item is now before us. To hear, consider, and act on the following resolution. In accordance with GASB 54, the Board of Finance of the Town of Fairfield approves the special revenue funds and related fund balance classifications that are identified on pages 74 to 76 of the 2012 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. That item is before us. Nothing from board members, public, nothing. Okay, all in favor of this? All opposed? Abstentions? The item carries. Thank you very much.
Good night.
All right.
Thanks, Joe.
Good night, Joe. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. All right. Item number 6. This is a follow-up item to a discussion that was submitted to a subcommittee made up of Mrs. LeClaire, Mr. Stone, and myself back in the fall. You recall that Mr. Hiller was no longer able to serve as our clerk and left his post, and at that time, we asked Mrs. Bossi, who's the controller, to serve as our interim clerk for the Board of Finance. Well, we conducted a search for a new clerk for the Board of Finance. The remuneration was about, I want to say, $10,000 for the interim position. That's $10,000 for a year. That's $10,000 annually. So Mrs. Leclerc, Mr. Stone, and I met several times, some live and in person, and some, I think, telephonically once or twice, once maybe, to discuss this issue, and came up with the following. After a search and after working with the Human Resources Department to advertise for the position, it is the recommendation of our subcommittee that we appoint Caitlin Bosse to be our clerk on a permanent basis at an amount of $12,000 per annum as a stipend, and that her appointment be reviewed annually with, when we look at the auditor relationship, and I believe the May or June timeframe. Mrs. Leclerc, help me out. When do we appoint the auditors? Is it May or June of each year? I think it is May that we appoint the auditors. The one exception to this being that this would not be reviewed in May of this year. It would be reviewed in May of the subsequent year, at which point we could revisit the item. But I think that's the, I'm very pleased to make this recommendation. As chairman, I work with the clerks of the board very closely, and Caitlin's done a fantastic job for us. She's been tireless in her efforts. She's been very responsive, and she's also agreed to sit here with us late into the evening. So, and that alone should do it, right? I'll defer to my colleagues on the subcommittee for any comments that they would like to make on this matter.
I think it was well said by you, so.
That's typical, right? I talk too much. But that would be our recommendation. I'd like to make a motion that we appoint Caitlin Bosse to be our clerk of the Board of Finance at a stipend of $12,000 per annum, effective immediately, and to be reviewed annually, effective May of 2014, or at the date that we review the auditor's appointment. Do I have a second for that motion? I'm going to go with Mrs. Leclerc because I'm a member of our committee.
Bob won.
Or Bob? Okay. Any questions, comments on this item? Seeing none, all in favor? Those opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations or condolences, whichever.
Definitely condolences.
All right. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bolito to discuss the 2013 budget hearing schedule. This, remember, we set the dates back in December. This is to actually assign the departments to the dates. And I know Mr. Bolito and the Budget Subcommittee have worked hard on this, so I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll make this quick and easy. What we try to do, as opposed to last year, was to spread out the pain a little bit over the course of the budget hearing cycle. One of the things we heard last year via feedback was that some of the nights were a little bit too loaded, a little bit too top-heavy, because of the fact that we voted on the capital, the non-recurring capital tonight, and not in further into February. It freed up some time the first date that we have in February. So basically, we spread it out, and we were able to knock off the meeting that was originally scheduled for, I want to say, April 4th or 5th. So we were able to shave one night off of it. One thing you'll notice is that land acquisition is not on here because they're not seeking a budget, from what I understand from the Finance Department. Other than that, everything else is kind of grouped and categorized as it is in the budget book. We try to put the not-for-profits on the same night as culture and recreation. That format, again, is to be determined. In the past, we've had the presentations, and we were having them by request. We're going to be flexible about it and see how it plays out. Certainly, Mr. DeWitt and his subcommittee will have a lot to say about that. What I also did was to have rather than a second Board of Education night specific to them, what I did was leave time on Thursday, March 21st, to have a final follow-up for all departments This way, if there's any questions that we have that need to be answered, there's an opportunity to do that on a night that's, a little bit lighter than most, and it's prior to the open forum at the senior center. The other thing I want to point out is that, quite frankly, it was my thought to eliminate the public budget comment session at the senior center. The attendance the last 2 years has been, quite frankly, pathetic. We think we had about 5 people last year. When we first started this thing, there wasn't Fair TV, and we wanted to give people who couldn't make our evening meetings an opportunity to show up, voice their opinions, ask us questions, for us to give our general opinions about things. It's become kind of obsolete, I think. So I wanted to get rid of it. Others convinced me maybe to keep it, and I was fine with doing it for 1 more year. But I got to say, if we don't get any kind of reasonable attendance at this thing, it would be my very strong recommendation that this is it. This is the last chance. Yes, Mr. Brockfeld.
I agree with everything you said. I was going to ask that question.
Yeah.
And I just would follow up with a second question, which is there any suggestions that you guys thought about or that Mr. Mayor or the administration might have on how to advertise this better or make sure that everybody in town who would be a candidate for coming is aware of it? Because I agree with you. The first year we did it, it was a very, very tumultuous budget that year, if I
Yes,
remember
it was
correctly.
well attended,
And,
yeah.
and we had it was overflowing, in fact.
Yes.
And then in the years we've done it, every year it's gotten to the point, like you said, last year, it was the press and the administration
Right.
basically outnumbered the public significantly, by
Yep.
the way. So I was just wondering if you guys had any...
It's been noticed in the newspapers. We've mentioned it during our meetings, which are on Fair TV and covered in the newspaper. I suppose there's maybe some other ways to get the word out there, but I honestly, my opinion is I don't think the issue is people not knowing that we're having it. I think it's just that people aren't coming. And maybe that's because of the fact we have Fair TV and...
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, Mr. Bolito, is that okay?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Mr. Mayor, would it be an abuse of the system? We have a system where we're able to contact taxpayers, citizens. Obviously, we use it in emergency situations mostly. I wouldn't necessarily be calling people at home for this, but would it be acceptable to send out a proactive email to everybody who's on our list, just reminding them that we have this session and they're available to come and ask us questions? Just to see if there's demand for the meeting?
I don't think I want to use the reverse emergency service system, but that's certainly not my decision. And I assume it's been posted on the town website, but I'm not certain about that. But we do not have an email database that I'm aware of for the town. I mean, I know that we collect some data, but...
Oh, it's only phone? Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that. Okay.
And I wouldn't want to
Yeah,
be...
Mr. Stone.
I wouldn't want to be calling people.
Mr. Stone.
Yeah, I just, we discussed this, and like Mr. Bolito said, there are only a handful of people, and with Fair TV, I assume they're watching it on that, or they're just not that interested. And anyway, to your point with the, I hate to say something like that, but a lot of those people probably don't even have internet, I mean, they're probably not on computers or whatever. But I would be willing to try it 1 more year, but this got to be the last year. Unless it's, the other thing is, what I've noticed is there's been meetings in the evening, and we did this primarily for seniors, I believe, but there's been meetings in the evening for other things, and I've seen plenty of seniors here, so if they're interested, they make an effort. I just don't think that at this point, I think maybe we're just doing a great job. I don't know, but they're just definitely not there.
Yeah.
Mrs. McCarthy-Vey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just would like to add, the town Facebook page is another way to get that out. And I also think that the PTA blasts, though I know that's not the targeted or intended audience, however, people have neighbors and
I actually
folks to
think
know.
the intended audience is everybody in town.
That- Right.
So,
I recognize that. I think
Yeah.
that I am in favor of continuing this opportunity, because though certainly folks who are interested come out at night, but not everyone can. And I agree that you'll assess, but there are a few different ways that I think advertisement can happen. I will also just note that hopefully our town website will be updated, and it's my hope that we will have the ability to create some of those email databases so that interested parties will be able to get proactive communication in a way that doesn't cost us anything additionally. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's pretty much it.
Great. So, you want to, go ahead, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Mr. Blue and I, we talked earlier about, on that first meeting, adding active medical. 'Cause
Right, one
it's
thing that
not in
Mr.
the
Mayor had
department.
mentioned was the fact that we have the retiree medical. I know that we've done medical as encapsulated in some other department. I can't, off the top of my head, recall which one. Maybe Mr. Flynn, you could help me.
We typically, as I recall, we typically discuss the entire internal service fund and OPEB thing when we do human resources, because Mrs. Marilees is typically here.
What I can do is make
Many
a
of the
notation about that with human resources.
Workers' comp, the heart and hypertension are all part of human resources.
Right.
Active medical is not.
Right, well, active medical is split amongst all the departments.
Correct. Has no-
Right, but we
right.
do it in, we've always done it with the human resources department.
That would be that night.
Yeah. So let's make sure we do that.
Yes.
That night.
Huh?
Yes, Mrs.
This
Leclerc.
one, why don't, because that one night on the 27th looks like it's pretty full. If we add the active medical in there, do you want to move debt service up to the first night? And then if we don't have time, we could carry it over to the next night?
I have no objection to that. That's fine.
It's a good idea. That's a good idea.
How do my colleagues on the subcommittee feel? Good? Yay, okay. So we can move debt service up to the 19th with the proviso that if we need to carry it over, we can.
And what's nice is we get those big issues on the table very early in the budget process. So,
On the not-for-profit, I owe First Selectman Tetro a call about our outbrief, which seems like 100 years ago with all the other things that have been going on in the last couple months. But if we're even going to have follow-on activities, and what I'll do is I'll take an action to see if we can maybe put together a format. And I would like to include Mr. Steele in that conversation as well, because I think we would be doing the entire budget process a big disservice if we said, you know, not-for-profit nation should do something here and then something different at the RTM. So hopefully we can come up with a similar format for both.
excellent idea. Thank you. And by the way, to the subcommittee, thank you for your continued fine efforts on this. This process is arduous, and you guys, throughout all the years, have done a great job with it. So thank you for your diligence.
And Mr. DeWitt will get our food check.
Well, Mr. Brown, being the secretary, now has responsibility for the coffee list.
That is an excellent point. Mr. Brown is the snack guru for this budget season.
I'll take care of that. We include the selectmen in this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, put them first, because they always get off the, you know.
Okay.
Cannolis are welcome, by the way.
I make a motion that we accept the schedule as recommended by the Budget Subcommittee of the Board of Finance. We have a second from Mr. Brockfeld on that. So the item is before us. Questions, comments, concerns? All in favor? Those opposed? Abstentions? None. Thank you. One last item. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, because it's communications to the board. Ms. Caitlin, we don't have anything that you're aware of, correct, other than one item we forwarded today, which was a communication from the chairman of the Board of Education, who's looking for volunteers to serve on a strategic planning committee for the Board of Education, where they are reviewing educational goals and educational mission. I think he can say it more eloquently than I, and we did forward to the board, it's obviously FOIable, a letter from the chairperson of the Board of Education looking for volunteers and representatives from our board. If you are interested, please forward that interest on to me, and I will act accordingly.
I'm not interested.
Put your hand up.
So I think we're done.
We have our man.
When are those meetings? Are they in the evening?
They don't know. They said they would accommodate the individual schedules once they're selected to serve on the commission. So, yes, I did hear you volunteer. Everyone hear Bob volunteer?
I heard it. Excellent choice.
Okay, so do I have a motion? Mr. Belito, do I have a second? Mr. DeWitt, all in favor of adjournment? Opposed, abstentions? Thank you, everybody. Good night.